Chapter 54. Jianqin had no idea what was happening to his body. He had already lost control of his body and was unable to stop his body from absorbing the surrounding spiritual energy. Even with Jianqin's steel-like willpower, he could not help but feel a wave of panic when he sensed the terrifying speed at which his body was absorbing the external spiritual energy. If his body continued to absorb the spiritual energy of the world at such a speed, it would not take long before he would explode from the powerful spiritual energy. Furthermore, what made Jianqin the most puzzled was that he had no idea what was going on. Why would his dantian automatically absorb the spiritual energy of the world for no reason? Furthermore, the terrifying speed of absorption made Jianqin feel a wave of shock. With Jianqin as the center, the spiritual energy of the world within a radius of several kilometers rapidly gathered towards Jianqin. The surging spiritual energy of the world had already formed a gust of wind that whistled wildly within Kargath Academy, causing the fallen leaves to flutter and sand to fly. However, when such a large amount of spiritual energy of the world entered Jianqin's dantian, it disappeared like a stone sinking into the ocean. What Jianqin was worried about did not happen. Seeing this, Jianqin finally let out a sigh of relief. Although he did not know what had happened to his dantian, it was fine as long as he did not explode from the spiritual energy of the world. At the same time, at the top of the tower in the center of the academy, the expression of the Dean of Kargath Academy changed slightly. He exclaimed, "What's going on? Why is the spiritual energy of the world fluctuating so violently?" As soon as he finished speaking, the Dean's body turned into a blur as he directly leapt out of the window at the top of the tower. He flew through the air at a terrifying speed and arrived in front of Jianqin's dormitory in a short moment. He stared in the direction of Jianqin's dormitory with a grave expression. There was also some doubt and confusion mixed within. At this moment, a white figure shot over from the distance at an extremely fast speed. In less than a breath of time, it had crossed several hundred meters and appeared behind the dean. It was a middle-aged man in white robes. He was the vice dean by N. Not long after by N sensed them, dozens of figures quickly ran over from afar. However, they all eventually stopped quietly behind Vice Principal by N. Their gazes were all focused on the place where the yuan qi of heaven and earth was concentrated. They were all teachers of the academy and were not weak. At such a close distance, such a powerful fluctuation of the spiritual energy of the world naturally could not escape their notice. Bai En stared at the spot where the yuan qi of heaven and earth was gathered in surprise. His face was filled with confusion as he asked, "Dean, what's going on? Why is the yuan qi of heaven and earth in a radius of several kilometers gathering here?" Although the dean's face's expression, his face still was filled with confusion. "I have no idea what's happening here. Let's go take a look." With that said, the dean took the lead and walked into the dormitory, while Vice Dean Bayan followed behind. "All of you stay here. No one is allowed to enter." Just as the group of teachers behind him was about to follow in, the dean's voice suddenly rang out. Hearing this, all the teachers simultaneously stopped in their tracks and obediently stood where they were. None of them dared to disobey the dean's orders. Very soon, the dean and vice dean arrived at the place where the spiritual energy of the world was concentrated. It was outside Jianqin's dormitory. Bai En gently slammed his hand against the door. Without a sound, the door to Jianqin's dormitory shattered. As the door shattered, the scene in the dormitory entered their eyes. They saw Jianqin cultivating on his bed with his eyes closed. The tremendous amount of spiritual energy in the surroundings was absorbed into his body at an extremely terrifying rate, causing a hazy, blurry mist to form around him. Seeing this, the principal and vice principal of Kargath Academy were shocked speechless. No matter what, they would never have thought that the reason why the world energy fluctuated so much was because of a single person cultivating. What made them even more shocked was that Jian Chen's speed of absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth had already reached a shocking level. It's actually Changyang Shoten. How is this possible? How can he cause such a great effect with his strength? Vice Dean by N was shocked as if he had seen the most unbelievable scene in the world. The dean's face was also filled with shock. His bright and deep eyes stared straight at Jianchen. After a long while, he finally let out a long sigh and said, "This child is extraordinary." Vice Dean by N nodded when he heard that. He completely agreed with the dean's words. In fact, he had already thought that Jianchen was extraordinary. "Dean, what should we do now?" Vice Dean by N asked. "Wait." The dean opened his mouth slightly and only said a single word. Afterwards, the dean and vice dean of Kargath Academy quietly stood outside Jianchen's room, waiting for Jianchen to wake up. The two of them didn't enter the room, nor did they make any noise. They were afraid of disturbing Jianchen, who was immersed in cultivation. Jianchen was very clear about what was happening outside the dormitory. However, he couldn't move or speak at this moment. He already couldn't control his body at all. The rank 4 monster core in his hand, that was originally the size of a fist, was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye with the loss of energy. It had already become the size of a ping-pong ball. All the energy and the large amount of spiritual energy absorbed from the outside world had disappeared into Jianchen's dantian. It was like a stone sinking into the sea without any splashes. Regarding the situation in his dantian, Jianchen was very puzzled and puzzled. He didn't understand where all the spiritual energy of the world had gone to. Gradually, with the passage of time, the energy from the Class 4 monster core in Jianchen's hand had been completely absorbed. In his dantian, there was finally a change. 2 dots of light, one purple and one green, gradually appeared in his dantian. The moment these 2 dots of light appeared, the speed at which Jianchen's dantian absorbed the yuan qi of heaven and earth suddenly increased to an abnormally terrifying speed. At this moment, it wasn't just the spiritual qi within a radius of several kilometers that was affected. When the 2 dots of light appeared in Jianchen's dantian, the yuan qi of heaven and earth within a radius of several kilometers was affected. It surged towards Jianchen's dantian and entered his body through his pores, being absorbed by the 2 dots of light in his dantian. Due to the increase in the speed at which he absorbed the spiritual energy of the world, Jianchen's body had already formed a faint white mist that could be seen with the naked eye. Within the white mist, Jianchen's body was faintly discernible, giving him an even more mysterious feeling. The increase in the spiritual energy of the world was immediately noticed by the principal and vice principal, who were still waiting outside the door. The two of them looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. Right now, the entire Kargath Academy was filled with a gale because of the spiritual energy of the world. However, other than the teachers, all the students treated this gale as a normal gale and didn't affect them in the slightest. The absorption of the spiritual energy of the world in Jianchen's dantian continued for half a day before it stopped. Right now, all the spiritual energy within a dozen kilometers had almost been completely absorbed by Jianchen. Right now, other than a sword completely condensed from Saint Force in Jianchen's dantian, there were 2 additional specks of light, one purple and one green. The specks of light were extremely small and weak. They flickered as if they could be extinguished at any moment. Feeling the sudden appearance of the 2 specks of light in his dantian, Jianchen's heart immediately sank. This was the first time he had encountered an uncontrollable situation in his dantian. It was also something he was extremely unwilling to encounter. However, he was certain that the 2 specks of light had something to do with the uncontrollable absorption of the spiritual energy of the world. Could it be that these 2 specks of light were formed from the spiritual energy of the world just now? Jianchen guessed inwardly. The huge amount of spiritual energy of the world that had entered his dantian had disappeared, like a stone sinking into the ocean. This was an extremely inconceivable matter. However, After absorbing the huge amount of spiritual energy of the world, 2 specks of light had mysteriously appeared in his dantian. This made it very easy for Jianqin to connect the dots. However, what made Jianqin feel puzzled and uneasy was the 2 specks of light that had mysteriously appeared in his dantian. What was their use? Would their existence cause any adverse effects to him in the future? These were the questions that Jianqin was most worried about at the moment, especially the latter, which made Jianqin feel a sense of insecurity. After hesitating for a while in his heart, Jianqin finally tried to control the 2 specks of light. However, after a series of attempts, his heart became heavier and heavier. Although he could clearly see the 2 specks of light through his inner vision, once he tried to control them, he suddenly realized that the 2 specks of light in his dantian were like illusions. He could easily pass through them without being able to control them at all. It was as if they did not exist at all. The dantian was an extremely important place for every cultivator. Jianqin did not wish to see his dantian appear in a situation that he could not control. Otherwise, it might bring about fatal consequences at a critical moment. Forget it. If it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, it can't be avoided. Anyway, I've already died once. Why should I care so much? Very soon, Jianqin thought it through and no longer worried about the changes in his dantian. Since the situation was not something he could control, he could only accept it calmly. Jianqin slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was calm. Although successfully advancing to the saint stage was something to be happy about, he could not be happy because of the situation in his dantian that he could not control. Just as Jianqin opened his eyes, the dean and vice dean Bayan, who had been waiting outside, walked in at the same time. Seeing the dean walk in, Jianqin hurriedly got off the bed and bowed. "Dean, vice dean." The dean's old face was full of smiles. He looked at Jianqin calmly and smiled. "Changyang Shoten, there was an abnormality in the energy of the world here just now. Have you encountered any problems with your cultivation? If you have, you might as well tell me and see if I can help you solve it." The dean's voice carried some concern. Chapter 55. The dean chuckled and continued. "Changyang Shoten, you've already advanced to the saint realm, haven't you?" Jianqin nodded slightly and said, "Yes, I've just successfully condensed a holy weapon." "Then I wonder if your current strength is at the advanced or intermediate level of the saint realm." The dean smiled. In his opinion, Jianqin's current strength should be at least at the intermediate level of the saint realm. After all, he had seen with his own eyes that Jianqin had absorbed a huge amount of qi of heaven and earth just now. Although he did not know how Jianqin had digested such a huge amount of qi of heaven and earth, he understood that Jianqin's strength would definitely not stop at the primary level after absorbing so much qi of heaven and earth. As soon as he advanced to the saint realm, he directly skipped the primary level and became at least an intermediate level saint. At the thought of this, the dean could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. This time a real genius had finally walked out of his Kargath Academy. "Dean, I've just successfully condensed a holy weapon. Of course, my current strength is still at the primary level." Jianqin knew that the dean at most thought that he had absorbed a huge amount of qi of heaven and earth just now, so he asked this question. Primary level. Hearing this, not only the dean, but even the deputy dean Bayan, who was standing silently beside him, had a face full of disbelief. "How is it possible? You've absorbed such a huge amount of qi of heaven and earth. How can your strength still be at the primary level?" Bayan could not help but ask. Even the dean was full of doubts. "I don't know either." Jianqin smiled bitterly. He did not intend to tell them what had happened in his dantian. "All right, since Changyang Shangtian is fine, it's time for us to leave." The dean looked at Jianqin and said, "Changyang Shoten, now that you've just advanced to the saint realm, you should familiarize yourself with the use of the holy weapon." With that, the dean and the deputy dean left Jianqin's room. After leaving the dormitory building, the deputy dean Bayan asked curiously, "Dean, Changyang Shoten has clearly absorbed such a huge amount of qi of heaven and earth. How can his strength still be at the primary level of the Saint realm? This doesn't seem to make sense. Hearing this, the dean nodded slightly and said, "Yes, it does. Perhaps there's some secret on Chongyang Shoten that we don't know. Otherwise, how can he draw the qi of heaven and earth within a radius of 12 miles? This is an impossible thing." Then the dean paused and continued. "From now on, as long as it's not too big a problem, we shouldn't interfere. Let's let him grow on his own. Let's let him grow by himself. Let's not. TSS will TST. Let's T him. STSTT ST test. STSSES. Yes, by N understands. Bye. The vice dean replied respectfully. He knew that it was worth it for the Kargath Academy to raise a genius. The dean gazed at the blue sky and murmured, "Chongyang Shoten seems to be only 15 this year. A 15-year-old saint is enough to shock the Tianyuan continent. Looks like Chongyang Prefecture has really produced a genius this time. I hope he'll be able to walk on smoothly. He can't die prematurely, or it'll be a loss to the kingdom of Jessen. Sigh, it's a pity that the Chongyang ancestor has already disappeared for 100 years. If he were still alive, he would have probably succeeded already." After the dean left, Jianchen sat back down on his bed and observed the 2 specks of light that had suddenly appeared in his dantian. In the end, he sighed helplessly. Jianchen had no idea what was going on with the 2 specks of light. Although they were in his dantian, they were completely out of his control. Jianchen sighed inwardly. He had already decided to ignore them because it was a complete waste of time. After all, he had already died once, so he was able to accept many things. In this life, other than by Yuntian, who had given him his first taste of motherly love, there was nothing else that he cared about. Jianchen took a few deep breaths and slowly calmed down. Afterward, he extended his right hand. With a thought, a powerful pulse of energy flashed and a slender sword appeared in Jianchen's right hand. The sword was very small, and its entire body was silvery white. It was like a mirror that could clearly reflect the surrounding scenery. The sword was 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide. On the surface of the sword, near the hilt, there were 2 words, "Light Wind." The shape of the sword was completely based on the sword that Jianchen had used in his previous life. As for the name, it was the same as the sword he had used in his previous life. It was called Light Wind Sword. Jianchen's swordsmanship focused on the word fast. His swordsmanship was light and agile and could change into thousands of forms. It was like a gentle breeze that came and went without a trace, making it impossible to catch. Thus it was called Light Wind Sword. Holding the Light Wind Sword, Jianchen couldn't help but smile. Especially when he held the Light Wind Sword, he felt as if he had returned to his previous life. The only difference was that at this moment Jianchen felt as if the sword in his hand was like an extension of his arm. He didn't need to use too much strength to control it. Moreover, Jianchen could clearly feel that his spirit was perfectly connected with the sword in his hand. It was as if the 2 were one and no longer separated. This was a feeling that he had never felt before in his previous life. Jianchen extended his finger and lightly flicked the shiny silver sword. Ding! Following a crisp sound, the Light Wind Sword let out a crisp sound. From the looks of it, the Light Wind Sword looked like it was forged from fine iron. Jianchen was filled with joy as he used his left hand to gently stroke the Light Wind Sword. Looking at it, it was as if the sword was his most beloved person. For a true swordsman, their love for the sword was something that could not be replaced by anything else. The sword was their life and their soul. In his previous life, Jianchen was such a person. When Jianchen summoned the Light Wind Sword, the saint weapon that was entrenched in his dantian disappeared. At this moment, all of his strength was concentrated on the sword in his hand. Not only could this sword display a powerful attack, it was also the source of Jianchen's strength. It would replace Jianshin's dantian and provide him with an endless supply of energy. With a thought, the light wind sword in Jianshin's hand disappeared, and a smaller version of the light wind sword appeared in his dantian. In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed since Jianshin had successfully become a saint. In these 2 days, other than occasionally observing the purple and green lights in his dantian, Jianshin spent the rest of his time in the Academy's library. He hoped that he would be able to find something related to his dantian from the books, but unfortunately, he was unable to find anything. In these 2 days, the news of Jianshin becoming a saint spread throughout the Academy, causing another wave. This was because Jianshin had become a saint too quickly. Everyone in the Kargath Academy knew that when Jianshin had just entered the Academy a few months ago, his strength was only at the 8th layer of Saint Force. But in just a few short months, Jianshin had broken through from 80% Saint Force to Saint. Such a fast cultivation speed made everyone in the Kargath Academy gasp in surprise. This speed had completely surpassed the cultivation genius of the Kargath Academy, Chengmingxiang. Far away from the Kargath Academy, in a dazzling palace, a middle-aged man in a purple and gold robe was sitting in the study, reading a book. "Your Majesty, there is a messenger requesting an audience." At this moment, a deep and respectful voice sounded from outside the door. Hearing this, the middle-aged man's gaze slowly moved away from the book and looked towards the door. He said in an indifferent tone, "Come in." This middle-aged man was the ruler of the kingdom of Jessen, Card's son. As soon as the king's voice fell, the door of the study was gently opened. A young man in a black robe who looked to be around 30 years old quickly walked in. When he was 30 steps away from the king, he suddenly stopped and knelt on one knee. He said in a respectful tone, "Your Majesty, this is a letter from the Dean of the Kargath Academy, Lord Kafir." At first, the king didn't seem to care, but when he heard the name of the Dean of the Kargath Academy, Kafir's name, his expression immediately became serious. He slowly placed the book in his hand on the table and said, "Quickly present it." "Yes, Your Majesty." Standing beside the king, a personal guard in armor respectfully responded. He immediately took the letter from the messenger and carefully checked it in his hand. After confirming that there were no problems, he walked forward and handed it to the king. The king immediately opened the letter and read it. Then a smile gradually appeared on his calm face as he muttered, "This Changyang Shoten is truly a genius. Not only can he defeat a saint with only the 8th level of Saint Force, he can also defeat a mid-level saint with only the 10th level of Saint Force. Moreover, he can condense a saint weapon and become a saint at the age of 15. He truly is a genius. No wonder Royal Uncle praised him so much." With Royal Uncle's eyesight, there's naturally no problem with judging people. Since Royal Uncle has recommended Changyang Shoten, then I should do something. Changyang Shoten has Changyang Prefecture behind him, and he's also the 4th young master of Changyang Prefecture. It seems that it's impossible to control him. Since that's the case, I can only try my best to rope him in. Although Changyang Prefecture has been silent for decades, their family background is still there. Their strength cannot be underestimated. It's enough for me to do this. Since that's the case, let's do it this way." At this point, the king seemed to have decided on something. He immediately said, "Men, bring me a brush and ink." Soon, the servant prepared the brush and ink. His Majesty picked up the brush and began to write. Finally, he carefully read the words that he had written. Then, he slowly folded it and left the study room. The king held the written scroll in one hand and was escorted by a group of bodyguards. He passed through many halls in the palace and finally entered a beautiful courtyard. Just as the king stepped into the courtyard, an old man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s walked out of a room in the courtyard. He looked at the king calmly and smiled. "So it's your Majesty. Please come in." The king came before the old man. He did not enter the room. He handed the scroll in his hand to the old man and said in a serious tone, Senior Yiming, I have an important letter that I need you to personally deliver to Changyang Prefecture in Lore City. Hearing this, the old man's expression became slightly serious. He reached out to take the scroll in the king's hand and said, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. I will definitely deliver the letter." The old man knew that since it was a letter that required him to personally deliver, it was definitely not that simple. Chapter 56. The next morning, Jianqin, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. In the past 2 days, he didn't cultivate. Apart from going to the library to read books during the day, he spent the night in the dormitory familiarizing himself with the usage of the holy weapon in his dantian. He wanted to be able to use the holy weapon freely in the shortest time possible. After all, although Jianqin had advanced to a saint and the holy weapon in his body was connected to his mind, it was still not enough for him to perfectly grasp and use the holy weapon. For Jianqin, who had the experience of his previous life, the holy weapon in this world was still fresh in his heart. Without spending a few days to familiarize himself with it and accept it, even if the holy weapon in his body was connected to his mind, it would be difficult for Jianqin to exert his peak strength. This was because it was equivalent to a person who had lost an arm for more than 10 years, but the arm suddenly grew back. Anyone who is already familiar with the life of losing an arm would feel a little uncomfortable when faced with a new arm. This required time to slowly accept and familiarize himself with it. Slowly standing up from the bed, Jianqin directly left the dormitory. After going to the cafeteria for breakfast, Jianqin went to the library as usual. Although the library was now open, there was no one inside except for a middle-aged woman who was cleaning. Jianqin looked at the empty library, then went directly to the 5th floor of the library. After reading these days, almost all the books that interested Jianqin in the first 4 floors of the library had been read by him. The library had a total of 7 floors. The first 2 floors were open to students below the Saint Realm. The 3rd and 4th floors were open to students who had reached the Saint Realm, and the 5th floor was not open to the public. Only the teachers of the academy could read the books on the 5th floor. As for the 6th and 7th floor, there was a powerful barrier guarding the entrance. Only the principal and vice principal were allowed to enter. If anyone else wanted to enter the 7th floor, they would have to obtain the approval of the principal of Kargath Academy. Although the 5th floor of the library was not open to students, Jianqin's first place in the freshman martial arts competition was enough for him to enter the 5th floor of the library at will. The 5th floor of the library was not big, and there were not many books inside. In total, there were only 100 books, which was incomparable to the thousands of books on the 1st floor. However, Jianqin knew that any one of these books was much more valuable than all the books he had read before. The library on the 5th floor was extremely quiet. Although there weren't many people here, Jianqin could tell that this place had been cleaned frequently. The entire room was spotless, without a single speck of dust. Jianqin walked to the bookshelf and picked a book that talked about cultivation. The content of this book was completely about cultivation. Although Jianqin didn't know if the things inside would be helpful to him, at least it could enrich his knowledge in this area. Jianqin was very engrossed in reading. He was simply intoxicated. Although the content recorded in this book was of little help to Jianqin, it was an eye-opener for him. It was as if he had seen a completely different world of cultivation. These things were something he had never thought of in his previous life. This book was not thick, only a few dozen pages. Jianqin finished reading it quickly. After reading it, Jianqin put down the book and lowered his head to ponder for a while, digesting and memorizing the new things in his mind. After carefully putting the book back in its original place, Jianqin picked up another book and began reading. In the 5th floor of the library, almost all of the books were left behind by predecessors and some cultivation methods. However, among these cultivation methods, the highest rank was only earth rank. Time quietly passed. Jianqin stayed in the 5th floor of the library and read one book after another, completely forgetting the time. At this time, Jianqin wasn't the only one on the 5th floor. There were 2 more middle-aged men. With a glance, one could tell that they were teachers of Kargath Academy. The two middle-aged men obviously recognized Jianqin. When they saw Jianqin for the first time, their eyes showed a trace of surprise, but they didn't say anything to disturb him. At this time, an old man wearing a luxurious green robe walked up from below. The old man looked to be in his 50s or 60s. He had white hair and a youthful face. A pair of deep eyes flashed from time to time. The 5th floor of the library wasn't big. After the old man entered the 5th floor of the library, he was about to walk to the 6th floor from the side of the stairs when he inadvertently caught sight of a slightly thin figure from the corner of his eyes. The old man's body slightly paused, and he stopped in his tracks. He looked at the back of the figure, and then, with a smile on his face, he slowly walked to the back of the slightly thin figure in the school uniform and said, "Changyang Shoten!" Hearing this, Jianqin suddenly woke up. When he turned around and saw the old man standing behind him, his face was slightly stunned. He immediately stood up and smiled. "Dean, why are you here?" This old man was the dean of Kargath Academy. The dean's voice also woke up the two reading teachers. When the two middle-aged men saw that it was the dean, they were shocked. They immediately put down the books in their hands and stood up from their chairs. They slightly cupped their hands towards the dean and said, "Greetings, Dean." Their tone was filled with respect from the bottom of their hearts. The dean of Kargath Academy was a well-known figure in the entire kingdom of Jessin. This was because not only was he a powerful Heaven Saint Master, but he was also one of the 6 strongest experts in the kingdom of Jessin. Even in the Tianyuan continent, a Heaven Saint Master was a powerful figure who could do whatever he wanted. The dean's gaze lightly swept across the two middle-aged men. He waved his hand and said, "Don't mind me. Both of you continue reading your books." "Yes, Dean." The two middle-aged men immediately sat back down obediently. However, they were no longer able to focus on the books in their hands. The dean glanced at the books in Jianqin's hands and nodded with a smile. His eyes were filled with gratification as he said, "Changyang Shoten, do you also like reading these books?" Jianqin nodded without hesitation and said, "That's right. You can learn a lot from these books. Even if they aren't of any help to you, they can still broaden your horizons." Hearing this, the dean looked at Jianqin with admiration. "Very good, very good. Changyang Shoten, it's really rare for you to understand this. Since you like reading these books, I'll help you this time. Come with me." With that, the dean turned around and walked towards the stairs leading to the 6th floor. Looking in the direction the dean walked, how could Jianqin not understand what the dean meant? He was immediately overjoyed. He hurriedly placed the book in his hands back to its original position and followed the dean to the 6th floor. Seeing Jianqin disappear at the stairs, the two teachers' eyes were filled with envy. Only the dean and vice-dean had the authority to enter the 6th and 7th floor of the library. If anyone else wanted to enter, they would have to obtain the dean's personal approval. The 6th and 7th floor of the library was definitely the place that all the teachers in the Kargath Academy yearned for the most. This was because not only were there records of higher-level cultivation methods, there were also many other books that were much richer and of a much higher level. Most importantly, the 6th and 7th floor of the library recorded many spiritual materials and treasures of the Tianyuan continent. Very soon, Jianqin followed the dean to the entrance of the 6th floor. Here, Jianqin could clearly see a transparent barrier blocking the entrance. The barrier of the 6th and 7th floor was set down by the successive deans. Its defense is extremely strong. Even a Heaven Saint Master would not be able to break through it in a short amount of time. There was a hint of pride in the dean's voice. Then he took out a token made entirely of purple gold. There were very complicated patterns on the token. It looked like a picture. The violet gold token in the dean's hand emitted a faint violet light. The violet light grew brighter and brighter. In the end, a ray of light shot out from the token and directly hit the barrier. The transparent barrier rippled like water, and finally a large hole that could fit one person slowly appeared in the middle of the barrier. "Changyang Shoten, come with me." The dean called out to Jianqin and directly walked in. Jianqin followed the dean through the 6th floor of the library and directly to the 7th floor. The 7th floor of the library was extremely spacious. It was only the size of a room. In the center of the room was a wooden table. In front of the table was a small bookshelf. On the bookshelf were a dozen books that were not thick. On the bookshelf were 2 boxes. One of the boxes was completely made of extremely precious jade, while the other was completely made of violet gold. Both of them were extremely valuable. From this, it could be seen just how valuable the items in the boxes were. Ever since Kargath Academy was founded, this library has existed for several hundred years. In these several hundred years, other than the current dean, there have been quite a few people who have come to the 7th floor of the library. Every single one of them was either a renowned expert of the Tianyuan continent or a person in charge of a large organization. You are the only person who has entered the 7th floor as a student of Kargath Academy. The dean slowly said in an extremely calm voice, "Changyang Shoten, the 7th floor of the library is where the wealth of our Kargath Academy resides. The entire 7th floor of the library is enveloped by a powerful barrier. This barrier was set up by the first dean of Kargath Academy, Bunai, using his great strength as a saint ruler. The items inside have all been imprinted with a special imprint. As long as the barrier is not broken, it is impossible to take them out. The books here are either cultivation methods collected by Bunai or his personal notes on cultivation. This is the greatest wealth of our Kargath Academy." Hearing this, Jianqin's expression became serious. He never thought that the 7th floor of the library would be so important. What surprised him even more was that the first dean of Kargath Academy was actually a saint ruler. The dean looked at Jianqin with shining eyes. With a serious expression, he sternly said, "Changyang Shoten, as the dean, I permit you to look at any book aside from the jade box. You only have one chance, so I hope you will make good use of it." Jianqin solemnly nodded and said, "Thank you for your permission, Dean. Not only is the contents of the jade box completely useless to you right now, it might even become a hindrance to your growth. As a result, you cannot look at the contents of the jade box. The purple gold box contains a low-level heaven tier cultivation method, the Daluo Heart Sutra. You can read it as you wish. However, the true yang qi of your Changyang Prefecture's family heirloom is not much weaker than the Daluo Heart Sutra. As a result, you cannot be impatient as to what kind of cultivation method you want to cultivate." Chapter 57. Jianqin sucked in a deep breath and calmed down very quickly. He slowly walked to the bookshelf and glanced through the books, one by one. Afterward, he directly took out the first book and sat down in front of the desk in the center of the bookshelf. This book was about cultivation experiences and techniques for breaking through bottlenecks. It even clearly described the things one needed to pay attention to when breaking through to Earth Saint Master. Although there were not many books on the first floor, every single one of them was the best of the best. If they were taken outside, it would definitely lead to a storm of blood. Jianqin carefully flipped through the book page by page. He finished the book very quickly. After reading it, Jianqin immediately sank into deep thought. It had to be said that any random book he took out was enough to broaden his horizons. The cultivation system of this world had completely overturned Jianqin's previous life. After reading this book, Jianqin clearly felt that his understanding of the cultivation system of this world had deepened a little. Before long, Jianqin finished reading all the books on the bookshelf. Among the books, half of them described cultivation experiences and the various obstacles one would encounter, while the other half were cultivation methods. However, the highest level cultivation method was only high earth tier. The books that were most helpful to Jianqin were the cultivation experiences and the handwritten notes of the first principal of Kargath Academy, Bunnan. Jianqin's gaze landed on the purple gold box at the top of the bookshelf. According to the principal, the purple gold box contained a low heaven tier cultivation method. Although Jianqin did not know just how valuable a low heaven tier cultivation method was, he knew that it was definitely a priceless treasure. After all, heaven tier cultivation methods were ranked second among all the cultivation methods on the Tianyuan continent. They were only one level lower than the Saint tier cultivation methods on the Tianyuan continent. Jianchen slowly opened the purple gold box and saw a palm-sized book lying inside. On the cover of the book were the words Daluo Heart Sutra. When Jianchen held the book in his hand, a soft and comfortable feeling immediately filled his hand. There was also a sliver of warmth, as if it had just been touched by someone. The book was made from the fur of a magical beast. It was extremely tough and would not be damaged easily. Jianchen carefully took out the palm-sized book and began to flip through it. His face was stern. Clearly, he understood that it was extremely difficult for him to see such a high-level cultivation method at his current level. Although he did not plan on cultivating the cultivation method, it would be beneficial to him at the very least. He might even be able to learn something valuable from it. For hours later, Jianchen finally shifted his gaze away from the book. He lowered his head and pondered. Only when he was certain that he had completely memorized the contents of the book did he put the book back into the purple gold box and return to his original position. Glancing at the books on the bookshelf again, Jianchen let out a long sigh. He then made his way down the stairs without any reluctance. However, today's trip to the 7th floor of the library was extremely rewarding for Jianchen. Afterwards, Jianchen looked through all the books on the 6th floor. Although the books on the 6th floor were not as valuable as the ones on the 7th floor, they were still quite rewarding for Jianchen, especially the various cultivation experiences left behind by the predecessors. They were extremely helpful to Jianchen. Other than these, Jianchen also learned about many rare spiritual materials and treasures from the books. These were not things that could be found on the lower floors of the library. When Jianchen walked out of the library, the sky had already darkened. Unknowingly, he had already stayed in the library for an entire day. He had even forgotten to eat. Grumble. At this moment, Jianchen's stomach finally grumbled. Jianchen reached out and rubbed his stomach that was already hurting from hunger. His face revealed a trace of a helpless smile. He then walked directly in the direction of the cafeteria. After a hurried dinner, Jianchen walked directly to the dormitory. Along the way, he attracted the gazes of many students. Some were envious, some were admiring, some were jealous. There were all kinds of gazes. Jianchen did not care about the gazes around him. He walked straight to the dormitory. When he entered the dormitory building, he saw a familiar figure standing in front of his dormitory from afar. It was his big brother, Changyang-hu. It's already so late, but big brother is still waiting for me here. Could it be that there is something urgent that you need me for? Jianchen thought to himself. He quickened his pace and walked over quickly. Big brother, it's already so late. Why are you still waiting for me here? Can't you wait until tomorrow? Jianchen arrived in front of Changyang-hu and asked. When he saw that Jianchen had returned, Changyang-hu's face instantly turned bitter. He sighed and said, "Sigh, 4th brother, you're finally back. Where did you run off to today? I practically searched the entire school, but couldn't find you. I've been waiting for you here for an entire day." Jianchen's face revealed a trace of apology and said, "Big brother, could it be that you're looking for me for something important?" Hearing this, Changyang-hu's face immediately revealed a happy smile. He said excitedly, "Of course there's something, and it's a big matter. Come, 4th brother, let's go inside and talk." Jianchen nodded slightly. He took out the key from his space belt and opened the door of the dormitory. The door of this dormitory was newly changed. The previous door had already been smashed to pieces by the vice president. When they entered the dormitory, Changyang-hu immediately closed the door and said, "4th brother, just now there was a message from home. You're really lucky. I really envy you." Hearing this, Jianshin's face revealed a trace of confusion. He asked puzzledly, "Big brother, what's the matter?" Changyang, who walked to Jianshin's bed and sat down. He had a happy smile on his face and said, "Fourth brother, I guess you don't know yet. Father has already arranged a marriage for you." Hearing this, Jianshin's expression was clearly stunned. He immediately reacted and revealed a trace of disbelief. He exclaimed, "What? A marriage?" Changyang, who fiercely nodded and said happily, "Yes, fourth brother. And the bride is the king's third princess, Princess Jelin. I heard that the king took the initiative to propose this marriage." Hearing this, Jianshin's expression immediately became serious. He was very surprised by this situation. He was even more dissatisfied that his family had decided on his marriage without his consent. This kind of fate that was completely arranged by his family made Jianshin feel extremely disgusted. Seeing Jianshin's expression, Changyang, who thought that Jianshin was worried about the Princess Jelin's appearance, he could not help but chuckle and said, "Fourth brother, don't worry. Although I have never seen the Princess Jelin, I have heard many things about her. The Princess Jelin is the king's third daughter. She is a natural beauty with a face that can cause the downfall of nations. She has been a genius since she was young. Not only is she proficient in the 4 arts, she is also extremely talented in cultivation. It is said that when she was 15, her saint force had already reached the 7th layer. She is deeply doted on by the king and is the apple of his eye. His Majesty dotes on the Princess Jelin very much." At this point, Changyang, who sighed and said, "Let's not talk about the Princess Jelin's noble status. Just her talent in cultivation is not something that I can compare to. Fourth brother, it is a blessing for you that His Majesty has betrothed the Princess Jelin to you. You don't have to have such a bitter expression." Jianshin sighed inwardly. How could Changyang, who understand his thoughts? No matter how beautiful the Princess Jelin was, Jianshin would not be moved. Right now, he only wanted to wholeheartedly increase his strength and did not want to waste time on these matters. Furthermore, he was very clear that His Majesty must have known about his achievements in Kargath Academy. Otherwise, he would not have betrothed his most beloved daughter to him so decisively. Since this marriage was proposed by His Majesty, Jianshin was also clear that he had no power to reject it, not to mention whether his parents would give up such a good opportunity to befriend the royal family. This was also related to the royal family's reputation. Unless His Majesty took the initiative to withdraw the order, with Jianshin's current status, he could only accept it calmly. However, what made Jianshin feel at ease was that this marriage was only temporarily decided. As for when they would officially get married, this also meant that this marriage could be extended indefinitely. At the very least, it would give him some time to breathe. After all, in his heart, he still did not want to talk about matters of the heart. Furthermore, in his previous life, Jianshin and Xiaoyao had already become accustomed to drifting on the lake. They did not have a fixed residence, the sky as their blanket and the earth as their bed. If there was another person by his side in the future, he would really feel very uncomfortable. After Changyang, who left, Jianshin sat alone on the bed and pondered. It had to be said that this news from his family was really too sudden. It actually made Jianshin feel that he was caught unprepared. Sigh. It's better to spend the time on cultivation. After all, only with strength can one decide everything. When my strength is strong enough, even if I take the initiative to cancel the marriage, the king would not say anything. Jianshin let out a long sigh and slowly calmed himself down. Then he sat cross-legged on the bed and continued to cultivate. Jianshin took out a level 1 magic core from the storage ring, then slowly closed his eyes and began to absorb the energy in the magic core to cultivate. Since Jianshin's strength broke through to the Saint Realm 2 days ago, tonight was the first time he cultivated. For the past 2 nights, he had been familiarizing himself with the use and control of the holy weapon. Just as Jianshin began to absorb the energy in the magic core, the energy in the magic core suddenly flowed faster and faster. In the end, the energy in the magic core was like a runaway horse, crazily surging into Genshin's body, causing the speed at which Genshin absorbed the energy to soar to hundreds of times the usual speed in an instant. The sudden change made Genshin's expression change drastically. Although everyone hoped that they could absorb the energy faster, the speed at which Genshin absorbed the energy in the magic core had reached a very terrifying speed. Genshin simply could not refine the energy in the magic core in time. Not only was this not beneficial to him, but it would also bring him endless harm. This was because he could not control the energy that he had not refined. Once such a huge amount of energy ran amok in his body, the consequences would be so great that Genshin would be doomed eternally. Chapter 58. Genshin let out a long breath and slowly calmed himself down. Then he looked down at the magical core in his hand. Although he had only absorbed the energy for a short moment, he could clearly feel that the energy in the rank 1 magical core in his hand had been greatly reduced, and even the size of the magical core seemed to have shrunk. This scene made Genshin gasp. Although the energy in a rank 1 magical core was not particularly much, it would take at least 3 nights for Genshin to completely absorb the energy in a rank 1 magical core before advancing to a saint. Just now, he had only absorbed the energy in the magical core for a short breath, but he could clearly feel that the energy in the magical core had been greatly reduced. Genshin really did not dare to imagine how much energy he had absorbed in that short period of time. Then Genshin immediately checked his body again. But what surprised him was that after absorbing such a huge amount of energy, there was no reaction in his dantian at all, and there were no signs of his energy increasing either. It was as if the scene just now was just an illusion that had never happened at all. If it weren't for the fact that he could clearly feel that the energy in the rank 1 magical core in his hand had indeed been greatly reduced, Genshin would have thought that the scene just now was just an illusion because everything was just too strange. Genshin frowned and thought hard, but no matter how he thought about it, he could not figure it out. In the end, Genshin could only put this matter aside and continue to absorb the energy in the magical core to cultivate. However, after experiencing that scene just now, Genshin was obviously much more cautious this time. He paid full attention to the condition of his body to prevent that unbelievable scene from happening again. Unexpectedly, just as he began to absorb the energy in the magical core, the scene just now happened again. The magical core in Genshin's hand was emitting a faint light, and the energy inside was like a wild horse that had broken free of its reins. It surged into Genshin's body at an unbelievable speed, and then was absorbed into his body through the meridians in his arm and the pores in his body. Genshin sat cross-legged on the bed, and his body trembled slightly like a stone sculpture. Now he was finally sure that what had just happened was real and not an illusion. Just when Genshin was about to stop absorbing the energy in the magical core, he suddenly gave up on this idea, and then raised all his concentration to the peak, paying close attention to the situation in his body. He wanted to figure out what was going on, and why his speed of absorbing the energy in the magical core had suddenly increased to such a terrifying level. Moreover, when the energy entered his body, it immediately disappeared without a trace, and he did not know where it went. The size of the magical core in Genshin's hand was rapidly shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the huge amount of energy released from the magical core crazily poured into Genshin's body through the meridians in his arm and the pores in his body. Being impacted by such a huge amount of energy, Genshin felt a burst of pain in the meridians in his arm and a small part of his skin. It was different from absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth 2 days ago. The yuan qi of heaven and earth was in a gentle state, so under such a fast absorption speed, Genshin did not feel any discomfort. However, the magical core was different. The magical core was the essence of a magical beast's condensed energy, and whether it was the intensity or the purity of the energy, it was far from the most primitive yuan qi of heaven and earth that could compare to it. Moreover, the energy in the magical core also contained a kind of wild element. So such a fast absorption of the energy in the magical core brought about some drawbacks to Jianshin's body. Jianshin did not care about this little bit of pain and concentrated on closely observing the situation in his body. He saw that most of the huge amount of energy he had absorbed from the magical core was flowing towards a certain place in his dantian, and only a very small part of the remaining energy was left for Jianshin to absorb. However, when Jianshin found the place where the energy was going, his face suddenly became very interesting, because that place was actually the place where the 2 purple and green light spots suddenly appeared in his dantian 2 days ago, and energy was actually all absorbed by these 2 light spots. Jianshin slowly opened his eyes and looked at the magical core in his hand with a slightly dignified expression. Then he threw the magical core away, closed his eyes again, and continued to absorb the yuan qi of heaven and earth to continue his cultivation. The yuan qi of heaven and earth continuously gathered towards Jianshin, and the speed of gathering was actually more than 10 times faster than when he usually absorbed the yuan qi of heaven and earth. However, now, among the yuan qi that Jianshin absorbed, 99% was actually absorbed by the 2 strange light spots in his dantian, and the yuan qi that he could absorb was only 1% of the total. Inferring from this, Jianshin's current cultivation speed by absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth would be 10 times slower than before. After coming to this conclusion, Jianshin's face suddenly became ugly. His cultivation speed was only 1/10 of the usual, and this situation was definitely not what he wanted to see. What he did not expect was that the purple and green light spots in his dantian, which he did not know how they formed, would actually cause him so much trouble. Then, Jianshin tried to absorb the energy in the magical core to cultivate, and then the heavy expression on his face gradually relaxed. What made him feel very fortunate was that if he absorbed the energy in the magical core to cultivate, then not only would his cultivation speed not be slower than before, but it would also be 3 times faster than before. However, the only drawback was that the consumption of the magical core was too great, so much so that Jianshin's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Jianshin stopped cultivating, looked at the dark night sky outside the window, and sighed helplessly. If the 2 light spots in his dantian were to compete with him for energy every time he cultivated, then it would be very difficult for him to cultivate in the future. After all, by absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth, Jianshin's cultivation speed was only 1/10 of the usual, and although absorbing the energy in the magical core could increase his cultivation speed by another 3 times, the consumption of the magical core was so great that Jianshin could not bear it. A Class 1 magical core was at least enough for Jianshin to cultivate for 3 nights in the past, but now a Class 1 magical core could only last for less than the time to drink a cup of tea. Calculating from this, Jianshin would need to spend nearly 50 Class 1 magical cores to cultivate for a night. With such a large consumption, even if Jianshin was rich, it would be difficult to provide him with magical cores for cultivation. Baidu search. An hour is 2 hours, a quarter of an hour is 15 minutes, the time to drink a cup of tea is 10 minutes, and the time to burn an incense is 5 minutes. In the future, the smaller units of time will be calculated like this. Jianshin very quickly calmed down. With his wisdom, such a small setback would not be able to defeat him. Sigh, I'll take it 1 step at a time. If I don't have magical cores, I'll just hunt magical beasts to obtain them. Moreover, who knows when it will be full and won't continue to compete with me for energy. With this thought in mind, Jianshin directly took out a large number of magical cores from his space belt and continued to cultivate. The night quickly passed, and the next morning, Jianshin ended his cultivation. When he counted the number of monster cores he had consumed last night, he couldn't help but gasp. In just a single night, he had actually used up 56 monster cores of the first step. Jianshin's face revealed a trace of a bitter smile, although he still had many magical cores in his space belt. At this rate, the magical cores in his hands would not be able to last for more than a few days. Once his magical cores were exhausted, he could only rely on absorbing the energy of heaven and earth to cultivate. Now, Genshin only hoped that the two light spots in his dantian would reach a state of saturation soon, and not endlessly absorb energy like this. Looks like, when will I have to go to the forest to hunt magical beasts to obtain magical cores again? Genshin muttered in a low voice. After calming himself down, Genshin directly left the dormitory and then went to the small forest on the east side of the academy to explain some knowledge about techniques and battle experience to his older brother, Changyang-hu. When the sun had already risen high in the sky, Genshin finished explaining to his older brother. Big brother, let's stop here for today. You'll have to spend a little more effort on the utilization and transformation of power. As for battle experience, it will slowly increase as you fight, so you don't have to deliberately practice. Genshin said to his older brother, Changyang-hu. These days, Genshin would come here every morning to give his older brother some advice about martial arts. Changyang-hu nodded and said, I understand, fourth brother. Now, Changyang, who did not find it strange at all how Genshin knew these things. He did not know what kind of living environment Genshin's environment in Changyang Prefecture, but in his opinion, his fourth brother was a true genius. Even if he received some special care in the family, it was only natural. Maybe these things were taught to him by the elders in the family. Moreover, he also knew that his fourth brother was especially fond of reading. When he was in the academy, he would run to the library all day long if he had nothing to do. Maybe he learned these things from the books in the family's library. Big brother, take your time to practice. I will leave first. After saying that, Genshin walked into the depths of the small forest. On the other hand, Changyang, who continued to train. In an indoor martial arts arena of the academy, two youths wearing the academy's uniform were engaged in an intense battle. Both of them were wielding huge swords. One of them was wielding a huge sword that was flashing with a fiery red radiance. Waves of hot aura was being emitted from the sword. This person was none other than Chang Mingxiang, who was known as a cultivation genius in Kargath Academy. The huge sword in the hands of the young man who was practicing with Chang Mingxiang was flashing with a blue light. He looked a little older than Chang Mingxiang, but at this moment his face was dignified and his forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. The two people were fighting very fiercely in the field, but people with discerning eyes could see that the young man with the blue sword was completely suppressed by the young man with the fiery red sword. He did not have the strength to fight back and could only blindly resist. Okay, young master, stop fighting. If you continue, I won't be able to hold on. The young man with the blue sword suddenly said. Hearing this, Chang Mingxiang suddenly stopped, and then the huge sword disappeared from his hand. He said with a faint smile, Shala, now the time you can hold on is getting shorter and shorter. It seems that you should also work hard. The current you is much weaker than before. Hearing this, the young man with the blue sword couldn't help but bitterly smile and said, Young master, it's not that my strength has become weak, but your strength has grown too fast. I am no longer young master's opponent. Hearing this, Chang Mingxiang's face suddenly showed a trace of pride. Chapter 59. Hearing this, Chang Mingxiang's face immediately became serious. He took the letter from the student and began to read it. As he read, Chang Mingxiang's face gradually became gloomy. His expression became extremely unsightly and his eyes burned with raging flames of anger. Seeing Chang Mingxiang's expression, the youth who had been training with Chang Mingxiang carefully asked, Young Master Chang, what's wrong? Could it be that something has happened in the sect? Chang Mingxiang tightly clenched his fist and crushed the letter into a ball. At this moment, his face was filled with malevolence and his eyes burned with raging flames of anger and intense resentment. Changyang Shoden. Chang Mingxiang gnashed his teeth and his fists made cracking sounds. From this, it could be seen how furious he was. Hearing Chang Mingxiang say Changyang Shoden's name, the youth who had been training with Chang Mingxiang became more and more puzzled. He asked again, Young Master Chang, what happened? Chang Mingxiang took a deep breath and said in a low voice, His Majesty has already betrothed Princess Glan to Changyang Shoten. Moreover, they have already been engaged. Hearing this, the youth's face slightly changed. He knew very well that Cheng Mingxiang had a special liking for Princess Glan. Ever since Cheng Mingxiang had first seen Princess Glan in the imperial palace a few years ago, he had already been deeply infatuated by Princess Glan's fairy-like appearance and outstanding talent. From then on, he had been unable to extricate himself. In Cheng Mingxiang's heart, he had already set Princess Glan as his. After all, in the entire kingdom of Jessen, only he, Cheng Mingxiang, was worthy of Princess Glan. Whether it was his family background or his talent, Cheng Mingxiang was not inferior to anyone. This was especially true for the Huayuan sect behind him. It was the #1 power in the kingdom of Jessen apart from the imperial family. In the kingdom of Jessen, it was like a colossus with a transcendent status. As the young master of the Huayuan sect, his status was incomparably high. Previously, Cheng Mingxiang had asked his father to propose marriage to His Majesty more than once. But at that time his father had always rejected him with the reason that he should spend his time on cultivation and not delay his bright future for the sake of his children. Although Cheng Mingxiang was dissatisfied with his father's rejection, he didn't say anything. This was because, at that time, Cheng Mingxiang had already decided that Princess Glan was his, and no one would be able to steal her away. After all, in the Jessen kingdom, apart from himself, there was no one who could match up to Princess Glan, so he wasn't anxious at all. However, he had never expected that there would be someone in Kargath Academy who was not the slightest bit weaker than him in terms of cultivation. In fact, Cheng Mingxiang's talent was even higher than his. Not only did Changyang Shoten's appearance completely suppress his reputation as a cultivation genius in Kargath Academy, but he had also snatched away his beloved. How could Cheng Mingxiang accept this? The youth who was sparring with Cheng Mingxiang carefully looked at Cheng Mingxiang and said in a low voice, "Young master, what do you plan to do now?" Cheng Mingxiang's eyes flashed with dense killing intent as he said in a deep voice, "Princess Glan belongs to me. In the kingdom of Jessen, only I, Cheng Mingxiang, am worthy of her." Cheng Mingxiang's voice was filled with anger as he shouted, "Shala, call some people. We will go find Changyang Shoten. This time I will teach him a good lesson for daring to snatch my woman." "Yes, young master." The youth who was sparring with Cheng Mingxiang immediately ran out and began to contact some people. With the powerful strength behind Cheng Mingxiang, he quickly gathered a group of people in the academy. There were a total of 16 people. They were all children of noble families, and all had the strength of saints. However, most of them had their magic cores stolen by Jianqin in the forest. As a result, they couldn't complete their mission at all. Because of this, they naturally resented Jianqin. At this moment, when they heard that Cheng Mingxiang was going to personally teach Jianqin a lesson, they all took the initiative to sign up and were willing to participate in this operation. However, among them, there were 2 people that Jianqin was familiar with. They were Luo Jian of the Luo family and Ka Diun of the Cardi family. Cheng Mingxiang looked at the crowd calmly and couldn't help but show a smile on his face. He murmured in a low voice, "Very good. With so many people here, even if Changyang Shoten is crippled, Changyang Prefecture won't dare to say anything. After all, these people all have powerful forces behind them. At that time, even if His Majesty the King wants to intervene in this matter to protect Changyang Shoten, he will have a headache." Although Cheng Mingxiang was confident that he could easily deal with Changyang Shoten by himself, Changyang Shoten's identity had been completely different from the past since His Majesty the King announced the engagement between Changyang Shoten and Princess Glan. Not only did he have Changyang Prefecture behind him, but also the royal family. In the face of these 2 forces, even if Cheng Mingxiang had a powerful background, he had to consider the consequences. If he simply taught Changyang Shoten a lesson, nothing would happen. However, Cheng Mingxiang didn't want to let Changyang Shoten off so easily. Therefore, he called a few more people with powerful backing to act together. At that time, even if Changyang Shoten was crippled or even killed, there were so many forces behind him. Even if His Majesty the King wanted to investigate, he had to consider the overall situation. In the face of so many forces, Changyang Prefecture didn't even have the courage to speak. Shala, immediately send someone to find Changyang Shoten's location. Remember, this matter must not be publicized. If the vice principal or principal were to find out, all of our plans would fail completely. Cheng Mingxiang instructed the young man who previously sparred with him. Yes, young master. After that, Shala directly spent money or relied on her connections to secretly inquire about Changyang Shoten's location in the academy. At the same time, she also sent many trusted people to search the entire Kargath Academy. Kargath Academy was very calm. There wasn't the slightest ripple caused by the actions of Cheng Mingxiang and his group. After 2 hours, the 20 over students that Shala sent to search for Changyang Shoten returned one after another. Young Master Cheng, we searched the entire Kargath Academy, but we didn't find any trace of Changyang Shoten. The leader in charge of searching for Changyang Shoten reported to Cheng Mingxiang. Hearing this, Cheng Mingxiang frowned and said, "How is that possible? Could it be that Changyang Shoten isn't in the academy right now? I heard that Changyang Shoten especially likes to go to the library. I don't know if you guys went to the library to search." Luo Jian, who was standing at the side, said, "Although Luo Jian was stabbed by Jianqin a few days ago, after a few days of recuperation and taking good medicine, his injuries had already recovered. We also went to the library to search. Changyang Shoten isn't in the library." The person in charge of searching continued. At this time, a slightly fat young man opened his mouth and said, "I heard that Changyang Shoten is this year's newcomer king. The newcomer king has the privilege of entering the first 5 floors of the library. Could it be that Changyang Shoten is hiding on the 5th floor of the library? If that's the case, then we can only wait for him to come out." Hearing this young man's words, everyone, including Cheng Mingxiang, felt that it was very reasonable. The leader in charge of searching for Changyang Shoten shook his head and said, "No, I have already asked the cleaning lady in the library. She said that Changyang Shoten didn't go to the library today. Could it be that Changyang Shoten really isn't in the academy?" Cheng Mingxiang frowned slightly. At this time, the leader in charge of searching hesitated slightly and then said, "Young Master Cheng, although we didn't find Changyang Shoten, we found Changyang who in the small forest on the east side of the academy. Changyang, who is Changyang Shoten's elder brother. I don't think he doesn't know where Changyang Shoten is." Hearing this, Luo Jian's eyes lit up, but then his face became gloomy. He still remembered the scene that happened that night. The magic core in his hands was snatched away by the 2 Changyang Shoten brothers, Taita and a few others. He didn't have the guts to take revenge on Taita, but he didn't have much fear in his heart towards the 2 brothers, Changyang Shoten and Changyang Hu. That's right, Changyang Hu must know where Changyang Shoten went. I suggest that we go ask Changyang Hu. Luo Jian said in a low voice, and his eyes flashed with a sharp gaze. "Okay, let's go find Changyang Hu first." Luo Jian's suggestion was quickly approved by everyone. Then, in order to not attract the attention of the other students, the dozen of them rushed towards the small forest on the east side of the academy in different groups. When they arrived at the small forest, they saw that Changyang Hu was still practicing martial arts in the forest. As soon as he saw Changyang Hu, Luo Jian's eyes suddenly burned with anger. At this moment, Changyang Hu might be too engrossed in practicing martial arts, but he didn't notice the arrival of Cheng Mingxiang and a dozen others. Cheng Mingxiang and a dozen others quickly arrived in front of Changyang Hu and cooperatively surrounded Changyang Hu in the middle. At this time, Changyang Hu suddenly woke up, and when he reacted, there were more than a dozen students wearing school uniforms around him. Changyang Hu looked around, and when he saw the expressions on the faces of more than a dozen people, his heart suddenly jumped. He already had a bad premonition, especially when he saw Luo Jian's eyes filled with hatred. His face couldn't help but become dignified. "What are you doing?" Chanyang, who opened his mouth and shouted. Although he was surrounded by more than a dozen people, there wasn't the slightest trace of fear on his face. Luo Jian sneered and said, "Chanyang, who? Do you still remember what happened in the forest a few days ago?" Luo Jian's face suddenly became gloomy, and he stared sharply at Chanyang Hu and said sternly, "You actually dared to snatch the magic core that I spent 3 days to obtain with great difficulty and caused me to fail the task. I must properly settle this account with you." Chanyang Hu coldly snorted and looked at Luo Jian fearlessly and said coldly, "Luo Jian, you only have yourself to blame. You can't blame us. If you didn't snatch the magic core in our hands first, then the following things wouldn't have happened. You asked for all of this. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame your lack of strength. You were actually defeated by my fourth brother, who hasn't become a saint yet." At the end of his words, Chanyang, who looked at Luo Jian with a trace of disdain and ridicule in his eyes. "You." Luo Jian was suddenly speechless by Chanyang, whose last words. For him, the defeat in the forest that night was definitely a shame that could not be washed away in his life. With his strength as an intermediate saint, he was actually defeated by a freshman who was not even a saint, and the magic core that he spent 3 days to obtain was snatched away. This result was absolutely unacceptable to him as the young master of the Luo family. Chapter 60. Luo Jian flew into a rage out of humiliation. A huge cyan sword appeared in his right hand in an instant as he swung it towards Chanyang Hu's shoulder. Chanyang Hu's reaction was not slow either. His vigilance had already reached its peak when he was surrounded by these people. Just as Luo Jian summoned his saint weapon, a huge yellow axe immediately appeared in his hand. He fearlessly swung it towards Luo Jian's huge sword. Just as the two of them were about to fight, the surrounding people very sensibly retreated a few steps to avoid being affected. Bang! Luo Jian's huge sword and Chanyang, whose huge axe collided with a loud sound of metal clashing. The two saint weapons collided in the air and immediately separated. Because of the powerful recoil, both of them could not stop themselves from retreating at the same time. Chanyang, who retreated a full 4 or 5 steps before stabilizing himself, while Luo Jian only retreated a few steps before stabilizing himself. In this exchange, anyone with a discerning eye could see that Chanyang, who was at a disadvantage. Although Luo Jian's wind-attributed saint weapon focused on speed and was relatively weaker in terms of attack, his strength had already reached the level of an intermediate saint. Even if Chanyang, whose earth-attributed saint weapon was slightly stronger in terms of defense, he was still no match for Luo Jian. After all, Chanyang, who had just become a saint. Luo Jian did not plan to let Chanyang Hu off so easily. His body flashed with a cyan light as gusts of wind constantly revolved around his body. Luo Jian arrived in front of Chanyang, who had an extremely fast speed. His huge sword left behind a cyan light in the air as he chopped towards Chanyang, who had an extremely fast speed. With his wind-attributed saint force, Luo Jian's speed was much faster than the others. Chanyang, whose expression suddenly changed. Luo Jian's attack was so fast that he did not have any extra time to counterattack. In the end, he could only barely raise the huge axe in his hand to block. Chanyang Hu died. However, just as Chanyang Hu used the huge axe in his hand to block Luo Jian's huge sword, an angry roar rang out from the side. Ka Diyin slashed towards Chanyang Hu with a huge sword in his hand, directly chopping at Chanyang Hu's right arm. The intense pain caused Chanyang Hu to groan. Ka Diyin had clearly used a lot of strength in this attack, leaving a deep wound on Chanyang Hu's arm. Because of the huge injury to his arm, Chanyang Hu was unable to maintain the saint weapon in his hand. The huge axe once again turned into a beam of energy and disappeared in his hand. Luo Jian's eyes flashed with a sharp light. He once again swung the huge sword in his hand across Chanyanghu's chest. The sharp tip of the sword easily cut through Chanyanghu's uniform, leaving a deep wound on his chest. Immediately, a torrent of blood flowed out from his body, quickly dyeing the front of his uniform red. The intense pain caused the muscles on Chanyanghu's face to twitch slightly, but he did not let out a single scream. "Chanyanghu, you didn't think that you would have such a day, did you?" Luo Jian laughed loudly, his face filled with malice. The resentment he had for Chanyanghu naturally would not be so easily resolved. He once again swung the huge sword in his hand, adding another wound to Chanyanghu's body. Chanyanghu's eyes were filled with resentment as he stared at Luo Jian. He angrily said, "Luo Jian, you useless thing. If you have the guts, go fight with my fourth brother. Let's see if he won't beat you until you're looking for your teeth on the ground." Hearing this, Luo Jian's face suddenly became gloomy. He immediately took a step forward and directly kicked at Chanyanghu. Chanyanghu's eyes flashed. Just as Luo Jian's foot was about to reach his face, he suddenly stretched out his left hand and firmly grabbed Luo Jian's foot. He then pulled back with all his strength. Luo Jian's body suddenly lost balance and directly fell to the ground. "Ha!" Chanyanghu angrily shouted. His left hand formed a fist, and all the saint force in his body gathered on his fist. He then fiercely smashed at Luo Jian, who had fallen to the ground. Luo Jian's reaction was not slow. Just as his body fell to the ground, he immediately bounced up from the ground, narrowly dodging Chanyanghu's full-strength punch. Bang! Chanyanghu's fist directly smashed into the ground, creating a deep crater. His fist had already completely sunk into the ground. "Chanyanghu, you're courting death." Luo Jian's handsome face was pale with anger. He angrily shouted, and all the saint force of the wind attribute gathered on his fist. He then fiercely punched Chanyang, whose chest as fast as lightning. Chanyang, who spat out a mouthful of blood. His body was directly sent flying by Luo Jian's punch. He flew for a distance of 4 or 5 meters before crashing to the ground. Just as Luo Jian wanted to rush up and beat up Chanyang, Cheng Mingxiang suddenly stopped in front of him and said, "Luo Jian, it's enough to teach him a lesson. Our main target is Jianqin, not Chanyang. Let's first ask him about Chanyang Shoten's whereabouts." Luo Jian slowly nodded and did not say anything. If other people came out to stop him, he would definitely disdain them. However, Luo Jian did not want to offend Cheng Mingxiang. Cheng Mingxiang came in front of Chanyang and sneered, "Chanyang, where is Chanyang Shoten?" Chanyang struggled to get up from the ground. His face was now pale, and blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth. Fortunately, his saint force was of the earth attribute, so his defense was stronger. Otherwise, if it was someone else, they would not have had the strength to get up from the ground. Chanyang, slowly glanced at the dozen youths and said in a deep voice, "I don't know. Even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Although Chanyang, was very confident in Jianqin's strength, he could tell at a glance that the dozen youths were all saints. He did not think that Jianqin could defeat so many people by himself. Cheng Mingxiang's expression changed slightly, and he immediately became gloomy. He said coldly, "Chanyang, I'll ask you again. Where is Chanyang Shoten?" Chanyang, sneered, "I said I don't know." "Humph." Cheng Mingxiang coldly snorted and punched Chanyang in the face, knocking Chanyang to the ground again. He said coldly, "Are you going to tell me or not?" Chanyang, whose eyes burned with rage. He struggled to get up from the ground again and said angrily, "I won't tell you. Cheng Mingxiang, you better kill me today. Otherwise, I, Chanyang, swear that I will make you regret it in the future." Cheng Mingxiang's face showed a trace of disdain. "Chanyang, what qualifications do you have to say that? Just because of your identity as the young master of Chanyang Prefecture? Humph, my Huayan sect does not put a mere Chanyang Prefecture in our eyes." As soon as he finished speaking, Cheng Mingxiang's eyes flashed with a cold light. His right hand formed a fist, and a fiery red light flickered on his fist. He directly punched Chang Yonghu in the head and said angrily, "Are you going to tell me or not?" Chang Yonghu's head was broken and bleeding from Cheng Mingxiang's fist. Blood flowed from his forehead and quickly rolled down his resolute face, making him look incomparably fierce. "I'll fight you to the death." Chang Yonghu could no longer bear it. A huge cyan axe appeared in his left hand, and he roared as he swung it at Cheng Mingxiang. A huge fiery red sword appeared in Cheng Mingxiang's hand, and he easily blocked Chang Yonghu's attack. Not to mention that Chang Yonghu was currently seriously injured, and he was using the axe in his left hand that he was not familiar with. Even if he was in his peak condition, he would definitely not be Cheng Mingxiang's opponent. Cheng Mingxiang looked at Chang Yonghu in disdain and said mockingly, "Chang Yonghu, I advise you to obediently tell me the whereabouts of Changyang Shoten and save yourself from physical pain." Chang Yonghu gasped for breath. At this moment, he was surprisingly calm. He was very clear in his heart that if he continued to stay here, he would definitely be in danger. He carefully looked at the surrounding terrain, and after making some mental calculations, he immediately put away his saint weapon, turned around, and ran in the direction of the Academy's field. This small forest was very remote. Usually, almost no one would pass by here, and what happened here would naturally not be known by the outside world. He believed that once he ran to a place with many people, Cheng Mingxiang and the others would definitely not dare to make a move. Moreover, he had many good friends in the Academy. Although Chang Yonghu did not expect them to help him fight against Cheng Mingxiang, at least they could still report to the Academy's teachers and the vice principal. Seeing that Chang Yonghu was actually running in the direction of the Academy's field, Cheng Mingxiang's expression changed slightly, and he immediately shouted, "Quickly stop him!" The dozen or so youths standing behind him who had not made a move immediately rushed forward, and quickly chased after Chang Yonghu. Cheng Mingxiang's body also turned into a sharp sword and shot towards Chang Yonghu at an extremely fast speed. Chang Yonghu was now seriously injured and simply could not outrun the crowd. In a short moment, the people behind him had already closed the distance by a lot. Looking at the rapidly approaching enemies behind him, Chang Yonghu understood that they would probably catch up to him before he could run out of the small forest. Thinking of this, Chang Yonghu gritted his teeth, and his advancing body suddenly stopped, and then ran in the opposite direction into the depths of the small forest. Chang Yonghu's sudden change of direction made everyone behind him feel very surprised, but immediately a cold smile appeared on everyone's face, and the speed of the chase also slowed down. The group of people behind Chang Yonghu fanned out and chased after him unhurriedly. Beside Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian sneered and said, looking at the direction in which Chang Yonghu is running, "He is most likely going to find Changyang Shoten." Cheng Mingxiang nodded slightly and said, "It makes sense. It seems that Changyang Shoten is really not in the academy." Chang Yonghu was running with all his strength in front. Now, not only was his forehead covered in blood, even his school uniform was dyed red by blood, looking incomparably miserable. He did not know where Jianqin was, but he knew that in the depths of the small forest, there was a hillside that was not high. The hillside's terrain was complex, and the trees were much more lush, very suitable for hiding. In a situation where there was no hope of returning to the academy, Chang Yonghu's only way was to use the complex terrain of the hillside to shake off the group of people behind him. However, Chang Yonghu might have forgotten that in the morning, when Jianqin finished teaching him about skills, he also left in the direction he was going now. Under a waterfall on the hillside, a young man wearing a school uniform was practicing swordsmanship on the grass not far from the pool. The young man's figure was relatively thin, and his long black hair reached his waist. He had a very handsome and resolute face, and a pair of eyes that shone with a sharp light like a sword, making people unable to look directly at him. In the young man's hand was a 4-foot-long, 2 fingers wide, silver-white, thin long sword. On the sword surface, There were two large words written in flamboyant calligraphy: breeze. The young man stood there quietly, holding the long sword in his hand. The tip of the sword slanted to the ground. His whole body was as motionless as a mountain. At this moment, a gleam of light flashed through the young man's eyes. At this moment, his body began to move without any warning. His body arched as he rapidly moved on the spot. The silver-white sword in his hand had completely turned into a white blur. Countless sword shadows constantly flashed through the white blur, leaving only afterimages in the air. The young man's mysterious footwork allowed him to move back and forth in a fixed area. His movements were like moving clouds and flowing water. He was extremely agile, just like a cunning rabbit. The speed at which he stabbed his sword was unbelievably fast, making it impossible for the naked eye to catch him. Chapter 61. Jianchen quickly moved across the grass. The light-winged sword in his hand had already turned into a silver ray of light as he stabbed in all directions. His sword technique was swift and fierce. Following Jianchen's quick movements, the wind brought about by his movements caused some of the leaves on the ground to flutter in the air. They looked like butterflies dancing around Jianchen. At this time, Jianchen's sword technique suddenly changed. Even though his sword technique was still as fast as before, every time he stabbed out, the tip of the sword would tremble at an extremely high frequency. The trembling of the sword tip formed a blurry image that normal people wouldn't be able to see clearly. After a moment, the sword in Jianchen's hand suddenly stopped moving. However, even after such a long period of intense movement, Jianchen didn't seem to be panting at all. His breathing was still as steady as before. At the same time, the moment Jianchen stopped, the surrounding leaves that were fluttering in the air also shattered and turned into powder. Only a small portion of the leaves remained intact. The only difference was that half of the leaves had the word sword carved on it. Although the size of the word was different, it took up the entire leaf. The other half of the leaves had the word sword carved on it, but it was either unclear or incomplete. If other people were to see this scene, they would definitely be shocked to the point that their mouths would be wide open. This scene was simply too shocking. It must be known that in the scene just now, the leaves were fluttering chaotically in the air. Countless leaves were constantly intertwining with one another. Just looking at one of the leaves would cause one to be dazzled, not to mention using a sharp sword to carve a word on it. Most importantly, the leaves were very thin and easily broken. Using a sharp sword to carve a word on such a thin leaf without leaving a single mark on it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. If Jianchen's actions were to be made known to others, then his name would definitely spread across the entire Tianyuan continent in a very short period of time. Looking at the leaves and leaf powder that slowly drifted down from the sky, a smile gradually appeared on Jianchen's face. He muttered to himself, "Although the speed of the sword is much slower, my control over the sword is so strong that it can't be compared to my previous life. It's as if the sword has completely become my left and right arm. Perhaps this is the advantage of a saint weapon in this world." At this moment, Jianchen's ears twitched slightly. His eyes narrowed, and he raised his head to look at the forest in front of him. The silver-white sword in his hand also disappeared. Not long after, the trees where Jianchen was looking at began to tremble slightly. Following that, a person wearing a school uniform and covered in blood staggered out of the forest. When Jianchen's gaze fell on the person's clothes, he already knew that this person was a student of Kargath Academy. However, the blood on the person's clothes made Jianchen feel very puzzled. There were no magical beasts in the surroundings, so how could he be injured? Moreover, Kargath Academy had a clear rule that students could spar with each other, but it was forbidden to fight to the death. However, when Jianchen's gaze fell on the student's face, his face suddenly froze. At this moment, his gaze suddenly froze. He stared straight at the youth whose face was half covered in blood with a trace of disbelief in his eyes. "Big brother!" Jianchen let out a cry of surprise. His voice was filled with astonishment. Following that, his body slightly swayed, and in a short instant he had already crossed the distance of 30 meters and arrived in front of the youth, who was covered in blood. Seeing the several hideous and terrifying wounds on the youth's body and the already damaged flesh on his forehead, Genshin's eyes suddenly became bloodshot. He said in alarm, "Big brother, what happened to you? Who injured you like this?" Following his voice, a strong killing intent was emitted from Genshin's body. Other than his mother, Genshin was the second person who truly cared about his big brother Changyang, who since he had come to this world. This was because Changyang, who completely treated him as a younger brother. Genshin could still clearly remember that when he had first come to Kargath Academy, his big brother Changyang, who had brought him around the academy and introduced him to the rules of the academy as well as other matters. Afterwards, he had even taken great risks and spared no effort to travel 10 kilometers to kill a Class 1 magical beast in the forest. His goal was to give him a Class 1 monster core as a meeting gift. Although Class 1 magical beasts were no threat to Genshin in the slightest, Changyang, who did not have as much experience and powerful battle prowess as him, with only the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force, it was definitely not easy for him to kill a Class 1 magical beast. Later on, when he had fought with Kadiyun in the arena, his big brother Changyang, who had considered his own lack of strength and took the initiative to fight Kadiyun in the arena, Genshin could clearly feel that his big brother Changyang, whose concern for him had always been from the bottom of his heart. Now, in Genshin's heart, Changyang, who had already become a close relative. In his previous life, Genshin had been born in a time of war. When he was still an infant, his parents had been killed by the enemy because of the war. In that life, Genshin had no relatives and had never experienced the feeling of family. Since the heavens had arranged such a good fate for him in this life, Genshin treasured it very much. In Genshin's heart, Changyang, who had long occupied an important position, second only to his mother, by Yuntian. Seeing Changyang, who beaten to such a state, the anger in Genshin's heart had already reached an unprecedented height. With his eyesight, he could tell with a single glance that these wounds were caused by someone. Seeing Genshin suddenly appear in front of him, Changyang, whose expression was also stunned. However, his expression suddenly changed, and he anxiously said, "Fourth brother, why are you here? Quickly leave this place. They'll catch up soon." Changyang, whose face was full of anxiety. He had never thought that he would actually meet Genshin here. Genshin's face became extremely gloomy. He said in a deep voice, "Big brother, who beat you up like this?" Anyone could hear the anger in Genshin's voice that he was trying to suppress. Changyang, who pushed Genshin's body with both hands. His tone was full of anxiety. "Fourth brother, don't ask so much. Quickly leave here and take a detour back to the academy. Otherwise, they will never let you go." Although he knew that Genshin was very strong and could defeat an intermediate saint, Changyang, who would never think that Genshin alone could face more than a dozen students with the strength of saints. Moreover, one of them was Cheng Mingxiang, who had reached the strength of an advanced saint. Genshin's body stood there like a stone sculpture. No matter how hard Changyang, who tried to push him, he could not move. Genshin's eyes flashed with extremely strong killing intent. He stared at the woods in front of him with extremely sharp eyes. More than a dozen people in school uniforms appeared where Genshin was looking at. The ones walking in front were Cheng Mingxiang and Luo Jian, whom Genshin knew. As soon as they saw Genshin, Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian, and the others showed a trace of joy on their faces. Luo Jian even laughed out loud and said, "Changyang Shoten, we finally found you. Let's see where you can run to this time." More than a dozen young people quickly stepped forward without any instructions and immediately surrounded Genshin and Changyang, whose expression drastically changed when he saw that he had been surrounded again. His face immediately became ugly and he let out a long sigh. He did not say anything. Facing more than a dozen aggressive people, Genshin did not show the slightest fear on his face. He was still so calm. It seemed that he did not put these people who were not weaker than him in his eyes at all. Jianshin's face was gloomy. His sharp eyes swept across the faces of the more than a dozen young people around him. Anyone who was swept by his eyes felt a faint pain on their faces. Then a chill rose from the bottom of their hearts, as if Jianshin's eyes were completely sharp swords. "Who hurt my big brother?" Jianshin's tone suddenly changed. He shouted, "Stand out!" As he spoke, a huge aura emanated from his body. Facing more than a dozen people who were not weaker than him, Jianshin did not show the slightest fear. Instead, his aura was high, and he had a great momentum of not giving up. Jianshin's shout, coupled with the huge aura emanating from his body, frightened the group of people opposite him, including Cheng Mingxiang, to take a step back. After all, Jianshin was a person who had experienced the baptism of slaughter. He was far from being comparable to a group of immature students. Realizing that he had been scared away by Jianshin's shout, Cheng Mingxiang's face turned blue with anger. He, a senior saint, was actually scared away by a freshman who had just become a saint a few days ago. This was simply unacceptable to him. "Changyang Shoten, you're courting death!" Cheng Mingxiang flew into a rage out of humiliation. With a loud shout, a huge fiery red sword suddenly appeared in his hand. With a fiery red light, the huge sword pierced toward Jianshin's chest with a burst of hot aura. Humph! Looking at the incoming huge sword, Jianshin's eyes flashed with a strong killing intent. Immediately, the light wind sword appeared in his right hand and met Cheng Mingxiang's huge sword with lightning speed. Ding! Following a crisp sound, the tips of the two swords, which were completely out of proportion, came into contact with each other in an inconceivable manner. Looking at the two swords touching each other, Cheng Mingxiang's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. Whether it was the huge sword in his hand or the long sword in Jianshin's hand, the tip of the sword was very small. At such a fast speed, for the two swords to touch each other steadily was definitely not something an ordinary person could do. And to be able to do this, one had to be incomparably powerful. Moreover, their control over their saint weapons had already reached an extraordinary level. However, for Jianshin to be able to do this with just the strength of a saint, Cheng Mingxiang found it hard to believe. It wasn't that he didn't think that this was a coincidence, but when he saw Jianshin's calm expression, he immediately dispelled that thought. What made Cheng Mingxiang even more surprised was the sword in Jianshin's hand. This sword was just too small. In his eyes, this sword was like an enlarged version of an embroidery needle. It was 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide. It was as thin as a piece of paper. Anyone who saw it at first glance would think that this sword was very fragile, as if it could be broken with just a little bit of strength. Cheng Mingxiang dared to swear that this was the first time he had seen such a delicate sword. In fact, he had never even heard of it before. This was because in the Tianyuan continent, everyone used heavy weapons. Condensing one's own saint weapon into a heavy weapon had already become a habit that was deeply planted in everyone's heart. Chapter 62. Cheng Mingxiang's expression became serious. At this moment, facing a new student who had just become a saint a few days ago, this was the first time he had to face him properly. "Cheng Mingxiang, since you've injured my big brother, then don't even think about leaving here unscathed." Jianshin coldly stared at Cheng Mingxiang. Cheng Mingxiang coldly snorted and arrogantly said, "Changyang Shoten, I admit that I've underestimated you, but if you want to keep me here, then you don't have the ability to do so." Jianshin sneered as he looked at Cheng Mingxiang with a trace of disdain. "Whether I have the ability or not, you'll know once you try." As soon as his voice fell, Jianshin's wrist shook slightly. Under his skillful control, the light wind sword broke free from the stalemate with Cheng Mingxiang's greatsword and fiercely slammed into Cheng Mingxiang's greatsword. Clang! With the sound of metal colliding, Cheng Mingxiang's greatsword was directly knocked to the side by the light wind sword. Jianshin's greatsword was only 2 fingers thick, but it contained a frightening amount of power. Chung Mingxiang's hand that was holding the great sword was numb from the impact. At the same time, Jianqin's light-wind sword left a trail of silver light in the air as it pierced towards Chung Mingxiang's chest at an extremely fast speed. Chung Mingxiang was shocked. Jianqin's sword was so fast that he couldn't even see it coming. In his eyes, all he could see was a silver streak of light shooting towards him at an incredible speed. It was so fast that he didn't even have time to react. The tip of the light-wind sword pierced through Chung Mingxiang's uniform and directly into his chest. But under Jianqin's control, it didn't go too deep. When Chung Mingxiang felt a sharp pain in his chest, he immediately reacted and quickly retreated. As he retreated, Jianqin pulled out the sword that had pierced his chest. Chung Mingxiang looked at his chest that was stained red with blood. His eyes revealed a trace of fear. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of Jianqin's sword that was so fast that he couldn't dodge it. He swore that since he was a child, this was the fastest sword he had ever seen. At the same time, he was also shocked by Jianqin's strength. He really couldn't understand how a new student who had just become a saint could have such strength. Jianqin didn't plan on letting Chung Mingxiang go so easily. Using a mysterious footwork, he appeared in front of Chung Mingxiang like a ghost. The light-wind sword in his hand turned into a silver ray of light as it slashed across Chung Mingxiang's chest. Ah! Chung Mingxiang let out a miserable scream, only to see that there was already a bloody wound on his chest. The wound spread from the left side of his chest all the way to the right side. The wound was so deep that bones could be seen. Bright red blood surged out, and in the blink of an eye, his school uniform was dyed red. Jianqin's eyes were still filled with anger. He continued to dance with the light-wind sword, adding more and more wounds to Chung Mingxiang's body. Chung Mingxiang's mouth continued to let out blood-curdling screams. The arrogance on his face had long since disappeared. Facing Jianqin's extremely fast sword technique, he simply couldn't dodge. His body didn't even have the strength to resist. Jianqin's sword technique was simply too fast in his eyes. Every stab seemed to have turned into a ray of light, making it impossible for him to see clearly. Although his saint force was much stronger than Jianqin's, he didn't even have the opportunity to use it. He had completely lost the ability to fight back. The wounds on Chung Mingxiang's body continued to increase. Each wound looked hideous and terrifying, so deep that the bones could be seen. His originally clean school uniform was not only cut with a few long tears, but the entire set of school uniform was gradually dyed blood red. Moreover, the red range was constantly expanding. Seeing Chung Mingxiang, who was the strongest amongst them, unable to resist at all, the surrounding students were all dumbstruck. They stared blankly at Chung Mingxiang, who constantly let out cries of agony. Their faces were filled with disbelief as they stared at Chung Mingxiang, who had completely overturned everything they knew. Luo Jian was the first to react. Although he was also shocked by Jianqin's strength, when he saw that there were more than 10 of his companions around him who were at least primary saints, he couldn't help but feel emboldened. He immediately roared, "Everyone attack together! No matter how strong he is only one person. Don't tell me that with so many of us here, we are afraid of him." Saying that, a light green great sword appeared in Luo Jian's hand. With a roar, he took the lead and charged towards Jianqin. Hearing Luo Jian's words, the other dozen or so students came back to their senses. Looking at their companions, the fear in their hearts from Jianqin's display of strength was swept away. Next, huge swords, axes, sabers, spears, and many other weapons appeared in the hands of the dozen or so people. They then aggressively charged towards Jianqin. Jianqin's eyes flashed with a cold light. Facing more than 10 people who were not any weaker than him, he did not retreat. Instead, he took the initiative to charge into their encirclement. The light-wind sword in his hand turned into a silver light as it pierced towards the chest of one of the students. "Pooh! Gentian's light wind sword easily pierced through the student's chest. His sword was so fast that it was not something that a group of inexperienced students could block. Go to hell. At the same time, Jianqin was also surrounded by more than 10 people. More than 10 saint weapons emitted strong energy, fluctuations as they attacked Jianqin from all directions. Jianqin's face revealed a trace of a cold smile. The light wind sword in his hand emitted a misty sword aura as it emitted a strong and sharp sword chi. Following that, Jianqin's right arm turned into a blur as he stabbed the light wind sword in all directions with lightning speed. Every time he stabbed out, Jianqin would accurately hit a weapon. In this short period of time, Jianqin had already stabbed out more than 10 times. Ding! 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 A series of clanging sounds of metal colliding rang out in the air. The sounds had already merged into one, as if there was only one sound. When the light wind sword in Jianqin's hand collided with the saint weapons, the faces of those who were attacking Jianqin, including Luo Jian, changed. They all took a few steps back as their hands that were holding onto their weapons began to tremble. Although Jianqin's sword looked very small, the power that was hidden within it was very large. When these 10 people first collided with Jianqin's sword, their arms were already numb from the impact of the collision. Even after blocking the attacks of more than 10 people, Jianqin's expression didn't change at all. His movements didn't stop at all. His feet moved in a mysterious pattern as he shuttled back and forth between the dozen people. The light wind sword in his hand danced at an extremely fast speed, gradually forming a silvery, white sword light in front of him. Within the sword light, one could faintly see thousands of sword images floating in the air before disappearing in the blink of an eye. Following Jianqin's ghostly movements, screams of pain could be heard coming from the battlefield. The miserable screams caused those who were not mentally strong to feel a chill run down their spine. The blood-soaked Changyang, who stood to one side in a daze. He stared blankly at Jianqin, who constantly changed positions and moved around like a ghost, and at the miserable cries of over a dozen students. At that moment, his mind seemed to have stopped working. He had completely lost the ability to think. At this moment, the 10 students were all lying on the ground, their pale faces filled with pain. Originally, they were wearing a clean and pristine uniform, but now there were multiple tears. Each tear was dripping with blood, staining the school uniform red. Moreover, as the white light continued to flash on their bodies, the number of wounds on their bodies quickly increased. Initially, it was the upper half of their bodies, but it gradually spread to their thighs. In the end, their entire bodies were covered with terrifying wounds. The blood that was gushing out from their wounds was like a fountain, quickly turning them into people covered in blood. Jianqin quickly circled around the 10 students. In his hands, the light wind sword continuously slashed at the bodies of the 10 students, causing blood and torn clothes to fly into the air. Changyang, whose injuries had greatly affected Jianqin's heart. Towards these 10 students from the same school, Jianqin did not kill them, but he would definitely not let them off so easily. If these 10 people were not from the same school as Jianqin, and if Jianqin was not worried about bringing too much trouble to his family, he would definitely not hesitate to kill them. Senior Changyang Shoten, spare me, I won't dare to do it again. Senior Changyang Shoten, please let us off this time, we won't dare to do it again. Finally, someone could no longer bear the hellish torture and begged for mercy in a pleading tone. With someone taking the lead, the people behind began to beg for mercy one by one. However, there were still a few stubborn people who gritted their teeth and persisted. It was not that they did not think of running away, but whether it was their thighs or their right arms, they were all covered with terrifying wounds. Even the slightest movement would cause them to grit their teeth in pain, not to mention running away. At the very least, they did not have the willpower to endure this kind of heart-wrenching pain. Jianqin gradually stopped. His face was still as cold as before. His face was not red, and he was not panting. However, the light wind sword in his hand was already stained with blood. Jianshin's body was like a tall and straight mountain as he stood in the middle of the field. His pair of eyes seemed to be able to steal a person's soul as they flashed with a cold light. He slowly swept his gaze over the 10 students lying on the ground and said, "I can let you go, but tell me, who is it that injured my big brother?" It was young Master Cheng, Luo Jian, and Kadiun. Yes, it was the 3 of them who injured Changyang, who was injured by the 3 of them. We did not even make a move. The 10 youths scrambled to be the first to speak, as if they were afraid that Jianshin would be dissatisfied if they were too slow. At this moment, they no longer had any thoughts of taking revenge on Jianshin, and some of them even regretted participating in this mission. Among them, only half of them had their cores stolen by Jianshin in the forest. The other half had no enmity with Jianshin and were only gathered by Cheng Mingxiang. Jianshin's eyes flashed with a cold light as he turned to look at Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian, and Kadiun. His eyes flashed with killing intent. Chapter 63. Changyang Shoten, what are you doing? If you know what's good for you, you'd better let me go, and I'll let bygones be bygones. Otherwise, just wait for my Huayan sect's revenge. Cheng Mingxiang shouted, seeing Jianshin's current appearance. Even an idiot could guess that Jianshin wasn't planning on letting them go so easily. Right now, Cheng Mingxiang only wanted to leave this place as quickly as possible. As for revenge, there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. Jianshin coldly snorted and said, "Letting you go? It won't be that easy." Hearing these words, Cheng Mingxiang and the other 2's faces suddenly changed. Kadiun's face darkened as he said, "Changyang Shoten, we did injure your big brother Changyang, but now that you've injured us, let's cancel each other out." Jianshin slowly walked towards the 3 of them, his light wind sword emitting a sharp sword chi. It looked as if the light wind sword was wrapped in a silvery white aura that flickered in and out of existence. Cancel each other out? How could it be that easy? Today, the 3 of you will leave behind an arm. If you dare to attack us again in the future, I'll take your life. As he spoke, Jianshin had already arrived in front of Kadiun. The light wind sword in his hand emitted a beautiful silver light as it swept across Kadiun's right shoulder like a bolt of lightning. "Ah!" Kadiun let out a miserable scream. The intense pain caused his face to become completely distorted. His face had already become as white as paper without a trace of blood. From his right arm, blood spurted out like a fountain. His entire right arm had already been separated from his body and fell to the ground. Jianshin's sword had directly cut off Kadiun's right arm. Cheng Mingxiang and Luo Jian's faces suddenly changed. Their facial muscles trembled at the same time as they stared in horror at Kadiun, whose right arm had been cut off and who was still screaming miserably. Their faces had become incomparably pale, without a trace of blood. The 10 students who were lying on the ground looked at Jianshin with eyes full of fear. Jianshin's actions were completely out of their expectations. None of them would have thought that Jianshin would be so ruthless as to cut off someone's arm without hesitation. This scene had scared them to the point that their hearts were filled with apprehension. Each and every one of them looked at Jianshin with eyes full of fear. At this moment, they were secretly rejoicing that they had not made a move against Changyang, who, otherwise, they would have never doubted that Jianshin would cut off their own arm. After cutting off Cheng Mingxiang's arm, Jianshin acted as if he had just done something insignificant. His expression did not change in the slightest. Whether it was the bloody scene or Kadiun's miserable cries of pain, it did not affect his state of mind. Then Jianshin looked at Luo Jian and slowly walked towards him with the blood-stained light wind sword. Seeing Jianshin approach, Luo Jian's eyes finally revealed a look of fear. Resisting the pain from his wound, he desperately slid his 4 limbs backwards at a snail's pace as he cried out in alarm. "Changyang Shoten, what are you doing? Don't come over! Don't come over! Jianqin leisurely walked in front of Luo Jian and looked at him with a cold gaze. There was no trace of pity in his eyes as he slowly raised the light wind sword in his hand. Seeing Jianqin raise the silver sword in his hand, Luo Jian's expression was completely replaced with fear. He no longer had the arrogance from before and begged, "Changyang Shoten, don't! I beg you, don't cut off my arm. If you let me go this time, I, Luo Jian, swear that I will repay you in the future." Jianqin did not move at all. The light wind sword in his hand turned into a silver light, and under Luo Jian's terrified and disbelieving gaze, it cut off his arm with lightning speed. Ah! Following a miserable scream, Luo Jian's right arm fell off from his shoulder. Blood gushed out from the wound and sprayed out from the wound. "Changyang Shoten, I will definitely not let you go." Luo Jian's expression became extremely fierce as he roared with a heart-wrenching voice. His eyes were faintly red as he looked at Jianqin with a gaze full of hatred and resentment. Jianqin ignored Luo Jian's roar and continued to walk towards Cheng Mingxiang. Cheng Mingxiang's face had already become incomparably pale. Right now, his heart was filled with regret. If he had known that Jianqin was so strong earlier, he would not have brought only a dozen saints to take revenge on Jianqin. Otherwise, he would not have ended up in such a sorry state. Looking at Jianqin, who was walking towards him, Cheng Mingxiang suppressed the fear in his heart and forced himself to calm down. "Changyang Shoten, if you don't want your family to..." Just when Cheng Mingxiang reached there, Jianqin's face changed slightly. A vicious light flashed through his eyes, and with a sway of his body, he arrived before Cheng Mingxiang like a ghost. Before Cheng Mingxiang could finish a sentence, Jianqin swung his sword and cut off Cheng Mingxiang's right arm. Cheng Mingxiang let out a muffled groan as his expression became one of pain. Unlike Luo Jian and Kadiun, he did not let out a scream as his voice was forcefully suppressed in his throat. However, from the way his face was completely distorted, one could see how much pain he was in. Jianqin coldly looked at the three of them and coldly snorted. "Today, I will temporarily break your wall. If there is a next time, I will directly take your life. Don't think that I am speaking without thinking. I am a man of my word." After saying this, Jianqin's sharp gaze swept over the other dozen students present. Every student who was swept by Jianqin's gaze had their heads lowered in fear. At this moment, after witnessing Jianqin's ruthless methods, they did not dare to have the slightest thought of revenge in their hearts. Jianqin looked at the blood-stained light wind sword in his hand. With a thought, the blood on the light wind sword suddenly began to flow towards the tip of the sword. Finally, all of the blood gathered together and dripped onto the ground. In the blink of an eye, the light wind sword that was originally covered in blood once again became incomparably bright silver. After retrieving the light wind sword, Jianqin walked in front of his elder brother, Changyang Hu. Looking at the bloodied Changyang Hu, Jianqin's cold gaze immediately softened. With a slightly concerned tone, he said, "Elder brother, let's go back." Changyang Hu blankly nodded his head. Right now, the light in his eyes was still sluggish. He still hadn't recovered from the scene that had just happened. Perhaps the scene that had happened in front of him was too hard for him to accept. Jianqin supported the bloodied Changyang, who as they walked along a secluded path back to the dormitory. Even so, along the way, they still startled quite a few people. Soon, the news of Changyang whose injuries began to spread throughout the academy. Not long after Jianqin returned to the dormitory, the bloodied Cheng Mingxiang and a dozen others supported each other as they struggled to walk out from the depths of the forest on the east side of the academy. As soon as they appeared in front of the students, they immediately caused a wave of shock, especially when they saw Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian, and Kadiun's severed arms. Everyone who saw this scene widened their eyes, their faces filled with disbelief. The news of Cheng Mingxiang and a dozen others being injured spread like wildfire throughout the entire Kargath Academy. This matter was immediately reported to the vice principal by N. When Vice Principal by N heard that Cheng Mingxiang and a few others had their arms severed, he took this matter very seriously and immediately rushed to the Academy's infirmary. When Bai En arrived at the Academy's infirmary, a large group of students who had heard the news had already gathered outside of the infirmary. Vice President Bai En pushed through the crowd of students and directly squeezed into the Medical Administration Department. He saw that in the Medical Administration Department's large bed, there were more than a dozen students covered in blood lying on it. And in the center of the room, 2 middle-aged men and a middle-aged woman were closing their eyes slightly, their hands flat on top of 3 of the students. A milky white light was emitted from their hands, enveloping the 3 students. Enveloped by the milky white light, the terrifying wounds on the bodies of the 3 students were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The healing speed was simply inconceivable. In just a few breaths of time, the wounds on the bodies of the 3 students had completely disappeared. When the wounds on their bodies disappeared, the complexions of the 3 students clearly improved. There was no longer the slightest bit of pain on their faces. Instead, their faces were filled with relief. Even so, from the depths of their eyes, one could still see traces of fear. After treating the 3 students, the 2 men and 1 woman slightly bowed to Bai En, and then threw themselves into the treatment of the remaining students. The vice principal's face was unsightly as he slowly swept his gaze over the remaining students, especially when his gaze landed on Cheng Mingxiang and the other 2 who had lost their right arms. His face became even more gloomy. In a deep voice, he asked, "What is going on? Who injured you like this? Could it be those outsiders who were passing by? Humph! Don't they know that this area is my Kargath Academy's territory? They actually dared to injure my students in our Kargath Academy's territory. How preposterous!" Bai En's face was filled with anger. Obviously, he already believed that Cheng Mingxiang and the others were injured by some outsiders who were passing by Kargath Academy. "Vice Principal, it was Changyang Shoten. We were all injured by Changyang Shoten." A student said in a weak voice, "Yes, Vice Principal, you must seek justice for us. Not only did Changyang Shoten seriously injure us, he even chopped off the arms of young Master Cheng and the other 2. "Vice Principal!" Bai En was stunned when he heard that, and he felt disbelief in his heart. Among these students, even the weakest was a primary saint. Moreover, there were several intermediate saints and 1 advanced saint. Even if they encountered someone with the strength of a great saint, they would definitely be able to put up a fight. But what he couldn't believe was that so many of them had actually been beaten black and blue by a new student who had just advanced to the saint realm a few days ago. This moved Bai En, and he felt that it was extremely inconceivable. After confirming the authenticity of this matter, Bai En's face immediately became grave. Finally, with a heavy heart, he directly went to the top of the tower to find the vice principal of the academy. This matter was really too big. It was far from something that Bai En could solve. When Bai En roughly told the vice principal of the matter, the vice principal lost his usual steadiness. With a face full of shock, he stood up from his chair and said, "What? What you said is true. Cheng Mingxiang, Luo Jian, and Ka Diyan's arms were all chopped off by Changyang Shoten." "Yes, Vice Principal. I personally went to see them. Their arms were indeed chopped off," Bai En said with a serious face. "Ai." The Vice Principal sighed heavily and said, "This is troublesome. Changyang Shoten is too impulsive. I don't care about the Kadi family and the Luo family, but the Huayan sect is not something that Changyang Prefecture can provoke." Chapter 64. After a moment of silence, the principal said, "You're right. Changyang Shoten must be protected. Bai En, you stay in the academy and stabilize this matter for the time being. I need to immediately make a trip to Changyang Prefecture. Otherwise, once the experts of the Huayan sect arrive at the academy, things will be terrible." Afterwards, the dean did not go through the main door. He directly leaped out of the window of the tower. Then, like a large bird, he rose into the sky at an extremely fast speed and flew into the distance. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared at the end of the horizon. Watching the principal disappear into the horizon, Bai En sighed and muttered, "This time, Changyang Shoten has really caused too much trouble. If he had only injured a few of them, things wouldn't have ended up like this." But he actually cut off Cheng Mingxiang's arm. Although it's not impossible for Cheng Mingxiang's arm to recover, his condition is just too harsh. A 7th class Radiant Saint Master is not someone the Huayun sect can afford. At this moment, the matter of Cheng Mingxiang and the other two having their arms cut off by Jianqin had already spread throughout the entire Kargath Academy. Everyone was talking about this matter. As the truth of this matter gradually spread among the students, Jianqin's strength once again shocked all the teachers and students of the Kargath Academy. While the academy was in an uproar over this matter, Jianqin was sitting cross-legged in his room with his head lowered in thought. When he had cut off the arms of Cheng Mingxiang and the other two, Jianqin had already realized that he had probably provoked a huge problem. However, he did not feel the slightest bit of regret. Now, Jianqin was quietly thinking about how he should deal with the revenge from the 3 families. A day passed by very quickly. Evening. Dong dong dong. A series of knocks came from Jianqin's door. Hearing this, Jianqin, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, slowly opened his eyes. Lowering his head to look at the Class 1 monster cores that had already disappeared without a trace, he inwardly sighed. Afterwards, he looked towards the door and said, "Who is it?" "Changyang Shoten, I am Vice Principal Bai En." Bai En's familiar voice came from outside the door. Jianqin immediately got off his bed and opened the door. He saw the white-robed Vice Principal Bai En standing straight outside the door. However, Bai En's complexion was not very good. "Vice Principal, what's the matter?" Jianqin opened his mouth and asked. His tone was extremely calm. Although he had already realized something, it did not cause the slightest fluctuation in his calm. Vice Principal Bai En looked at Jianqin with a complicated expression on his face. He faintly sighed and said, "Changyang Shoten, pack your things and immediately come with me to the principal's office." "Oh." Jianqin faintly replied. Afterwards, he did not say anything and silently returned to the dormitory to pack his things. Jianqin did not have many things to pack. He put some of his own medicine into his space belt and then followed Bai En to the only tower in the center of the academy. "Hey, look, isn't that Changyang Shoten?" "That's right. Look at how he's together with the vice principal. He's probably going to be severely punished." When passing by the field, the students who recognized Jianqin immediately focused their attention on him and started discussing. Jianqin turned a deaf ear to the discussions around him. He followed Vice Principal Bai En and quickly arrived at the tower in the center of the academy. Then he directly went to the top of the tower and entered the principal's office. There were 2 old men sitting at a round table in the dean's office. One of them was the dean of Kargath Academy, while the other old man was wearing a long green robe. His long black hair was simply tied up and casually fell behind his back. The old man in the green robe looked ordinary, as if he was just an ordinary old man. "Principal, Changyang Shoten has been brought here." Vice Principal Bai En slightly bowed and said. Hearing this, the principal's gaze immediately fell on Jianqin. Then he said in a flat tone, "Bai En, you may leave." "Yes." Soon Bai En walked out. Now, only Jianqin, the principal of Kargath Academy, and the old man in the green robe were left in the office. Ever since Jianqin entered, his gaze fell on the old man in the green robe. Jianqin was no stranger to this old man. He was the housekeeper of Changyang Prefecture. Changbo, why are you here?" Jianqin looked at the old man in the green robe and asked. Changbo looked at Jianqin with a complicated gaze. He let out a long sigh and said, "Fourth young master, we all know about your achievements in the academy these days. Both your parents are very happy with your performance, but this time you were too impulsive." Jianqin naturally understood what Changbo was talking about. He firmly said, Changbo, I don't regret it. They only have themselves to blame for this. My elder brother didn't offend them at all, but they actually beat him to such a state. If I were given a chance to start over, I would still choose to do the same. Changbo inwardly sighed and said, Fourth young master, I don't object to your way of doing things. After all, on the Tianyuan continent, strength is everything. Although they are not as strong as you didn't consider the power behind them. If it was just the Karti clan and the Luo clan, our Changyang prefecture could barely deal with them. However, Cheng Mingxiang is the only son of the current sect master of the Huayun sect. In the kingdom of Jessen, the Huayun sect is second only to the imperial family. It is not an existence that our Changyang prefecture can provoke. Changyang Shoten, the Huayun sect, is extremely powerful. Although it is not as powerful as the imperial family, it is still feared by the imperial family. Of the 6 great experts of the kingdom of Jessen, 2 of them are from the Huayun sect, the dean solemnly said. Hearing this, Genshin's expression also gradually became solemn. At this moment, a soft knock sounded from outside the door, following which a respectful voice sounded. Esteemed Dean, Changyang, who has been brought here. Come in, the dean said. The door opened and a teacher walked in with Changyang, who was wearing a brand new uniform, but there were still clear scars on his face. Changbo. As soon as he entered, Changyang, who noticed Changbo standing beside the dean, he couldn't help but call out in surprise. The teacher didn't enter the dean's office. After sending Changyang Hu in, he respectfully bowed to the dean before gently closing the door. Changbo's gaze fell on the scars on Changyang Hu's face. A trace of anger flashed in his pair of ordinary old eyes, but his expression didn't change. He said in a gentle voice, Eldest young master, you've suffered. Changyang, who didn't mind at all and shook his head, saying, It's just a small injury. It's not a big deal. However, Changbo, why did you come to the academy? Changyang, whose tone carried a trace of doubt. Changbo's expression didn't change. He said in a gentle tone, Eldest young master, 4th young master, have you packed your things? Jianchen nodded silently and didn't say anything. I have packed my things. Changbo, are you here to take us away? Changyang, who asked with a reluctant expression. Changbo nodded, that's right. I'm here to take you away. It's no longer suitable for you to continue staying in Kargath Academy. Hearing this, Changyang, whose expression darkened. He had already stayed in Kargath Academy for quite some time. He already had a special feeling for the academy. Changyang Shoten, you two can leave first. I have some matters to discuss with Changbo, the dean suddenly said. Jianchen and Changyang, who didn't have any objections. They turned around and walked out of the dean's office. Jianchen and Changyang, who didn't have to wait for long. Changbo soon came out of the dean's office. But now, the way Changbo looked at Jianchen had changed. His eyes were filled with gratification and happiness. Jianchen and Changyang Shoten followed Changbo down the tower. They sat on Changbo's flying magic beast and left Kargath Academy. They flew straight in the direction of Lore City. Sitting on the back of the flying eagle, Jianchen and Changyang, who didn't speak. On the way home, both of them seemed to have a lot on their minds. In Jianchen's mind, the loving face of his mother, Bai Yuntian, couldn't help but appear. Although Jianchen's state of mind was no longer that of a child, he had never experienced this hard-won motherly love in his previous life. Jianchen's resistance was obviously very low. In Jianchen's mind, he couldn't help but recall his life in Changyang Prefecture, his mother's 100% care and love for him. This made Jianchen's cold heart, which had never experienced motherly love and familial love, feel as if it was placed in a warm ocean. He enjoyed and cherished it very much. Time passed quietly. The Class 4 flying eagle quickly soared through the sky. Its extreme speed brought about gusts of whistling wind that constantly roared and roared in Jianchen's ears. Jianchen's long black hair that reached his waist danced wildly in the whistling wind. Coupled with his handsome and extremely dashing appearance, he looked even more dashing. The flying magic beast flew over various cities and villages in the pitch-black sky. After a few hours of continuous flight and a journey of several thousand kilometers, it finally successfully arrived at Lore City. Under the control of Changbo, the flying eagle slowly descended in the backyard of Chanyang Prefecture. The miscellaneous people in the backyard had already been evacuated. Those who remained were the loyal guards of Chanyang Prefecture. With a sudden gust of wind, the flying eagle slowly descended in the backyard of Chanyang Prefecture. As soon as the flying eagle landed, Jianqin, Changyanghu, and Changbo jumped off from its back. Over a dozen people had already gathered before the flying eagle. The leader was a middle-aged man who seemed to be in his 40s. He wore black and white robes. He was the master of Changyang Prefecture, as well as Jianqin's father, Changyangba. Beside Changyangba stood 4 extremely beautiful women. They were Jianqin's mother and 3 other aunts. Between the 4 women stood a girl who seemed to be in her teens. She was Jianqin's second sister, Changyang Mingyue, whom he had not seen for several months. Beside Changyang Mingyue was a boy who seemed to be around the same age as Jianqin. They were Jianqin's 3 Changyangkes. However, Changyangke currently looked at Jianqin with a sliver of schadenfreude. Behind them stood a few middle-aged men and a few old men. They were all people of great authority in Changyang Prefecture. However, they were all extremely stern right now. Their gazes towards Jianqin were filled with mixed feelings. There was relief, anticipation, sighing, and helplessness. Changbo walked up to Changyangba and smiled faintly. "Patriarch, fortunately I have not failed you. I have safely brought back the 1st young master and the 4th young master." Changbo's expression was very calm. Changyangba clasped his hands at Changbo and said, "Changbo, thank you for your hard work." "You're too polite, Patriarch. This is only part of my job," Changbo said indifferently. Chapter 65. Jianqin and Changyang who returned to their mothers. Accompanied by 2 other aunts, they walked to the conference hall of Changyang Prefecture. "Ah-hoo, you've suffered in the academy. Look at the scar on your face." On the way, Jianqin's eldest aunt Linglong looked at the scar on Changyanghu's face with a distressed expression. Her eyes gradually became moist and tears kept rolling in them. Changyang, who didn't care at all, he smiled and said, "Mother, it's just a small injury. It's not a big deal. Fortunately, my 4th brother saved me. Otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to get out of bed and walk now." Hearing this, Linglong turned to look at Jianqin with a gentle smile on her face. She said, "Xiangtian, thank you so much for saving Ahu this time." Jianqin smiled and said, "Eldest aunt, what are you talking about? My eldest brother is in trouble. It's my duty to help him. Moreover, this matter was caused by me. My eldest brother was just implicated. As long as you don't blame me, I'm very happy." Linglong smiled and said, "Xiangtian, you're becoming more and more sensible. You're much better than us and Ahu. You're flattering me, eldest aunt." Jianqin chuckled. He could clearly feel that Linglong's attitude towards him was much better now. At the very least, she was no longer as indifferent as she had been in the past. "Mother, you're right. My 4th brother is very powerful. When he was not a saint, he could hunt 2nd-level demonic beasts alone. When he reached the saint realm, even Cheng Mingxiang, who was known as a cultivation genius in our Kargath Academy and had reached the senior saint realm, was no match for him. He was knocked down to the ground in a few moves. At that time, there were more than a dozen students who were above the saint realm besieging him. In the end, they were all easily injured by him. Speaking of this, Changyang, who looked particularly excited, he said excitedly, "Mother, you didn't see the scene at that time. It was spectacular. My 4th brother beat those people up in the blink of an eye. They were all primary and intermediate saints. They couldn't fight back at all." Hearing this, Jianqin's mother, by Yuntian, smiled happily and looked at Jianqin with affection. Humph! At this moment, a cold snort sounded from the side. Jianqin's third aunt, by Yushuang, coldly said, "You're powerful, but you're powerful enough to offend the Huayan sect. You've brought great trouble to our Changyang prefecture." Jianqin frowned. His third aunt, by Yushuang, had always had a prejudice against him since he was very young. Jianqin's mother, by Yuntian, was also very dissatisfied with by Yushuang's words. However, because it was her son who had caused trouble, she also felt that she was in the wrong. Moreover, his relationship with by Yushuang was not good, so she couldn't say anything. Otherwise, it would only escalate this small conflict. Jianqin's second aunt, Yu Fengyan, tried to mediate. "Forget it, third sister. What's done is done. It's useless to talk about it now. What we should do now is to properly think about how to deal with this matter." "Forget it, third sister. After all, Jianqin caused this trouble in order to save Ahu. This matter can't be completely blamed on him." Linglong also spoke up for Jianqin. Seeing that there were two people speaking up for Jianqin, Bai Yushuang lightly snorted and immediately shut her mouth. Bai Yuntian lightly sighed. Her gaze was both affectionate and worried as she looked at Jianqin. She said, "Xiang, we all know of your achievements in the Kargath Academy. Mother is proud of you. But how could you be so impulsive? You actually chopped off the Huayan sect's current sect master son's arm. Do you know that not only have you caused great trouble for yourself, but you've also implicated the entire Changyang prefecture?" Jianqin revealed a trace of guilt. He said, "I'm sorry, Mother. I've brought so much trouble to the family. Xiangtian, this matter has already happened. Don't blame yourself. Right now, let's hurry to the conference hall and discuss how to deal with this matter." Second aunt, Yu Fengyan, spoke up. Afterwards, the group gradually quickened their pace and headed to the conference hall. At this moment, in a dazzling palace, the king of the kingdom of Jessen was reading the letter in his hand. His brows were tightly knitted together. After a long while, the king slowly sighed. He said, "This Changyang Shoten is far too impulsive. He actually made such a huge mistake and chopped off the right arm of the Huayan sect master son. This matter has become huge. The Huayan sect is not something that the current Changyang prefecture can contend against." The king slowly placed the letter on the table and shouted, "Men, tell the commander of the ironclad army by Dao to immediately come here." "Yes, your majesty." As soon as the king finished speaking, a eunuch immediately ran out. Very soon, a middle-aged man in black armor, who seemed to be in his 40s, walked in from outside. The middle-aged man's appearance was nothing special. He had a resolute expression and a pair of bright eyes. However, the most eye-catching thing about him was the extremely sinister scar on his forehead. The scar ran across his entire forehead, causing people to shudder in fear. The middle-aged man only stopped when he was 10 steps away from the king. He clasped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, may I ask why you've summoned me?" The king slowly stood up and took the letter from the desk to the middle-aged man, saying, "Take a look." Hearing this, the middle-aged man in black armor took the letter from His Majesty's hand, opened it and began to read. But after he finished reading, his face became very dignified. "Sigh, I never thought that he would actually cause such a huge mess." The black-armored man deeply sighed as a sliver of worry appeared on his face. Young people are always so arrogant. They're just too impulsive. The king sighed. "By Dao, ever since you joined the ironclad army 20 years ago, you've never returned. Use this opportunity today to go back and take a look." "Yes, your majesty." A complicated expression flashed through the young man's eyes. The king suddenly became stern. "By Dao, you have to convince the people in Changyang prefecture to send Changyang Shoten away as soon as possible. Otherwise, once the people from the Huayan sect find us, we'll be in deep trouble. Only by sending Changyang Shoten away and mediating between us can we temporarily stabilize the conflict between Changyang prefecture and the Huayan sect. Right now, The surrounding countries have become restless. It looks like they haven't given up on the idea of invading our kingdom of Jessen. At such a critical moment, we can't allow any accidents to happen in our kingdom of Jessen, or the consequences will be unthinkable. Changyang Shoten's talent is supreme, and his potential is limitless. His future is limitless. He might be the only hope of our kingdom of Jessen in the past several hundred years. So we have to protect Changyang Shoten. Although we can't guarantee that his future growth will be smooth, we can't let anything happen to him in our kingdom of Jessen. The king's voice was extremely stern. A sliver of pride and joy appeared on the young man's face when he heard that. He forcefully suppressed his excitement and said, "Your Majesty, by Tao understands. I know what to do." The king slowly nodded. By Tao, there's no time to lose. Immediately set off for Changyang Prefecture. With your strength, I believe you'll be able to reach Changyang Prefecture before daybreak. Yes, Your Majesty. In the discussion hall of Changyang Prefecture, Changyang Ba sat boldly on the main seat. Below him sat Jianqin, his aunts, and a few core members of Changyang Prefecture. Below Changyang Ba sat caretaker Chang. Changyang Ba's face was filled with worry as he looked at Jianqin with a complicated gaze. He then said, "I'm sure everyone knows about what happened to Xiang, in the academy. The Huayun sect's current sect master's arm was cut off by Xiang, The Huayun sect will definitely not let this matter rest. Do you have any good methods to deal with this?" Everyone fell silent when they heard that. The Huayun sect was the greatest power in the kingdom of Jessen aside from the imperial family. Its strength was something that even the imperial family feared. It was not something that the current Changyang Prefecture could handle. Cheng Mingxiang was the only son of the current sect master and had been extremely talented since he was young. Now that his right arm had been cut off by Jianqin, his future would be greatly affected. Without any exaggeration, Jianqin had completely destroyed Cheng Mingxiang. Everyone present knew that the Huayan sect definitely wouldn't let this matter rest. After a moment of silence, an old man in his 60s finally said, "Right now, the best solution is to ask a Radiant Saint Master to regenerate Cheng Mingxiang's severed arm. However, only Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters have the ability to regenerate severed limbs. They're not people that we can ask. Furthermore, Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters are extremely rare on the Tianyuan continent. They do not have a fixed residence, and finding one is as difficult as ascending to the heavens. So, the chances of Cheng Mingxiang's severed arm being regenerated are basically zero." "Sai, that's right. In my opinion, this is the only way to quell the Huayan sect's anger. There's no other way. Even if the imperial family is willing to support us, I don't think the Huayan sect will let this matter rest. However, one thing is for sure. The fourth young master will be hard to protect," a middle-aged man analyzed. The middle-aged men and old men present were all people of great authority in Changyang Prefecture. They had long heard of Jianqin's performance in the academy, and they had already placed the hopes of Changyang Prefecture on Jianqin. As a result, although Jianqin had caused great trouble for Changyang Prefecture, no one blamed him. Everyone was thinking of ways to protect him. In addition, Jianqin was now engaged to Princess Glan of the Kingdom of Jessen. If this marriage went through, Changyang Prefecture's status in the Kingdom of Jessen would rise. If only the ancestor was here, an old man helplessly sighed. Hearing that, Changbo's eyes brightened. He sighed, "That's right. If Master was still here, we wouldn't have to gather here to discuss this matter. Unfortunately, Master has already been gone for several decades without any news. I wonder if he has failed." Hearing that, everyone in the hall fell silent. Jianqin's heart trembled. Although he had never heard of the ancestor or Changbo's master, he was able to infer some things from these words. He already knew that the ancestor everyone was talking about and the master Changbo was talking about should be the same person. Not only was this person incomparably powerful, not fearing the Huayan sect that had two great experts, but this person was also his ancestor. This question didn't hover in Jianshan's mind for long. Jianshan quickly threw it aside. Looking at the silent people in the hall, Jianshan hesitated for a moment before suddenly saying, "Father, how about we have Chang Bo send me out on a flying magical beast? As long as I'm not in Changyang Prefecture, I believe that even if the Huayan sect really comes, they won't do anything excessive." No. Just as Jianshan's words fell, Bai Yuntian and Chang Yangba's voices rang out at the same time. Chapter 66. That's right. Xiang'er, your mother is right. The outside world isn't as peaceful as the academy. It's filled with slaughter. With your current strength, you don't have the ability to survive. Don't bring this up again. I definitely won't agree to it. Chang Yangba said sincerely. Although his voice was calm, he firmly rejected Jianshan's idea. Jianshan had long since known that it would be very difficult for his family to agree to his idea. However, he didn't give up and continued, "Father, mother, don't worry. Although your child isn't very strong, I have the ability to protect myself. Moreover, I've read many books in the academy, and am already familiar with the ways of the Tianyuan continent. Once your child becomes powerful in the Changyang Prefecture, I'll be able to reduce quite a bit of trouble for the Changyang Prefecture." Fourth young master, things aren't as simple as you think. Once the Huayan sect learns that you aren't in the Changyang Prefecture, they'll probably send a large number of people to search for you. With the Huayan sect's influence in the kingdom of Jesson, it won't be difficult for them to find you. The one who spoke was a white-haired old man. In the hearts of these old men, Jianshan had already become the future hope of the Changyang Prefecture. None of them wanted him to die halfway. A 15-year-old saint with strength, no weaker than a high-tier saint or even a great saint. Such a heaven-defying genius would definitely be earth-shaking even in the entire Tianyuan continent. Perhaps in the eyes of these old men, Jianshan was no longer a person, but a living treasure. A treasure that radiated with endless light and could bring them endless wealth. As a result, the only thing on the minds of these people in the upper echelon of the Changyang Prefecture was how to protect Jianshan and prevent him from being harmed in the slightest, so that it wouldn't affect his future. Jianshan revealed a confident smile and said, "There's no need for everyone to worry about that. I've learned a lot about surviving on the continent from the Academy's library. I believe that I'll be able to escape the Huayan sect's pursuit." "No, Xiang'er, this is too risky. It's not worth it." Chang Yangba directly rejected Jianshan's suggestion. He continued, "Xiang'er, don't worry. Although the Huayan sect is powerful, our Changyang Prefecture isn't a pushover. Furthermore, although your grandfather has disappeared for many years, the prestige he left behind in this place still exists. The Huayan sect definitely won't dare to do anything to our Changyang Prefecture. If you stay here, we'll definitely do our best to protect you." Jianshan sighed in his heart. From Chang Yangba's firm tone, he could tell that his father would never agree with his idea. "That's right. But Xiang'er, this idea of yours is too risky. Even if you can escape the Huayan sect's pursuit, the Tianyuan continent's environment is not as simple as what you've read. It's best if you obediently stay in Changyang Prefecture. At the very least, your father and the other uncles will do their best to protect you." Bai Yuntian gently advised Jianshan. "Cough." Chang Yangba lightly coughed and said, "All right, let's discuss how to deal with the Huayan sect. I estimate that they've already received the news and will quickly rush over to Lore City. Time is of the essence." Chang Yangba's face returned to its previous seriousness. Everyone in the hall fell silent once more, tightly knitting their brows as they pondered. Why don't we ask the royal family for help? After all, the fourth young master is married to the kingdom of Jesson's Princess Glan. In the future, the fourth young master will be the king's son-in-law. Now that his son-in-law is in trouble, I believe that the king will not sit by and do nothing. Someone said. Hearing this, Chang Bo pondered for a moment before saying, If the royal family is willing to stand by our side and help us with all their strength, we can temporarily suppress this matter. However, this will definitely cause the Huayan sect to be dissatisfied with the royal family. Furthermore, this is an extremely important time. In recent years, the surrounding countries have been secretly mobilizing their troops, seemingly ready to make trouble. I estimate that they are planning to invade our kingdom of Jessen's rich territory. At such a crucial time, I believe that the king will not allow his relationship with the Huayan sect to deteriorate. After all, this is a matter of life and death for the kingdom of Jessen. Without the 2 heaven saint masters from the Huayan sect, the kingdom of Jessen will not be able to contend against the other countries in terms of peak experts. Although the 4th young master has great potential and is a source of hope for the kingdom of Jessen, no one can say for sure what the 4th young master's future will be like. Furthermore, the 4th young master is still young and needs a very long time to mature. At such a crucial time, the kingdom of Jessen simply does not have that much time to wait. Perhaps by that time, the kingdom of Jessen would have already been destroyed. In the eyes of the king, although geniuses are important, they are far less important than a kingdom. If the kingdom is destroyed, then even if there is an expert supporting him, what can he do? After all, establishing a kingdom is just far too difficult. Thus, I do not believe that the royal family will help us with all their strength. Afterwards, the people in the hall began to think of all sorts of methods, but after an entire night, they were unable to come up with a single one. Very quickly, the night passed under the tense atmosphere of the dozen or so people in the hall. At this moment, the sky was already starting to turn gray. It was already close to dawn. After an entire night of discussion, everyone looked a little tired. At this moment, a guard from Chanyang Prefecture ran in from outside and said, "Patriarch, a person who calls himself Bai Dao has arrived. He says he wants to see you." "Bai Dao," Chanyang Ba murmured with that. A sliver of thought appeared in his eyes before his eyes lit up. He immediately stood up from his chair and hurriedly said, "Invite him in." "Yes, sir." The guard accepted the order and quickly retreated. When Bai Yuntian heard Bai Dao's name, she clearly trembled slightly. A sliver of joy appeared in her eyes, but her expression soon became mixed. A sliver of doubt appeared in Jian Chen's eyes when he noticed a change in expression on his mother's face. He had never heard of this person called Bai Dao before, but judging from his mother's reaction, Bai Dao was probably acquainted with her. Jian Chen gently nudged Bai Yuntian and asked softly, "Mother, who's this person called Bai Dao?" Bai Yuntian turned her head slightly and looked at Jian Chen with a doting gaze. She said, "Xiang I'll tell you about this later." "Okay." Jian Chen nodded and said nothing more. Very soon, a middle-aged man in black robes strode in from outside. His face was resolute, and his sharp eyes flickered with light from time to time. On his forehead was a scar that stretched across his entire forehead, making him seem extremely vicious. Changyang Ba left his seat and made his way to the center of the discussion hall. He clasped his hands and smiled. "Brother Bai Dao, I never thought that I wouldn't see you in 20 years. How have you been?" The middle-aged man called Bai Dao clasped his hands slightly and replied, "I've been all right." Bai Dao paused for a while when he reached there. His gaze paused on Jian Chen and his mother for a while before he turned around and said, "Let's get straight to business. I've come under the king's orders this time, and I'm also here to pass on his orders." Changyang Ba immediately became stern when he heard that. He asked, "Brother Bai Dao, does it have something to do with Xiang?" Bai Dao nodded, correct. "The king wants you to immediately send Changyang Shoten away from Lore City. That's the only way to avoid a conflict between Changyang Prefecture and the Huayan sect for now." Changyang Ba frowned when he heard that. He clearly did not want to do this. Bai Dao continued, "The matter this time has gotten a little out of hand. Cheng Mingxiang is the only son of the Huayan sect master, and he's a talented citizen. He's the future pillar of the Huayun sect. Changyang Shoten chopped off Cheng Mingxiang's right arm, and Wu Ning destroyed Cheng Mingxiang. As a result, the Huayun sect will not let this matter go so easily. The Huayun sect has 2 Heaven Saint Masters. It's not something the current Changyang Prefecture can contend against. Although the imperial family also has 2 Heaven Saint Masters, these are special times. The neighboring kingdoms have begun to stir again. If I've guessed correctly, the kingdom of Jessin will be baptized by the flames of war again very soon. At this time, the king definitely won't offend the Huayun sect. As a result, we can only send Changyang Shoten away and have the imperial family mediate between us. Only then can we temporarily calm this matter and preserve the strength of the kingdom of Jessin. Is there really no other way? This time, it was Jianshin's second aunt, Yu Fengyan, who spoke. No. Bai Dao shook his head, his voice filled with certainty. Bai Yuntian's face had already paled. Her voice trembled as she said, "But the people outside are vicious. Xiang is still weak right now, so he'll definitely suffer a lot." Bai Dao deeply glanced at Jianshin, who sat beside Bai Yuntian, and said, "Only through suffering can one rise above others. If one doesn't experience the wind and rain, how can one grow into someone who can stand on their own? Spoiling him like this will not benefit him at all. Instead, it'll harm him." Hearing that, the upper echelons of Changyang Prefecture all nodded. Bai Dao's words made sense. However, Changyang Ba was still hesitant. Jianshin looked around. He knew that his chance had come. So he immediately struck while the iron was hot. He said, "Father, just let me leave. I'm confident that I can deal with anything that happens in the future. At the same time, I really want to go out and explore." "Patriarch, since the 4th young master wants to go out and explore, why don't we let him leave Lore City?" Bai Dao is right. Not only is this the only way to temporarily avoid conflict between our Changyang Prefecture and the Huayun sect, but it'll also be a very good training for the 4th young master. Without experiencing the wind and rain, no matter how talented the 4th young master is, his accomplishments will be limited in the end, Changbo said at this moment. Changyang Ba helplessly sighed when he heard that. He said, "Whatever. Since Changbo agrees with this suggestion, let's let Xiang'er leave Lore City and train outside. I'll send a few loyal guards with Xiang'er to protect his safety." Jianshin could not help but frown when he heard that his father would send guards to protect him. He said, "Father, there's no need to send guards. I want to go out and explore by myself. Xiang'er, it's far too dangerous for you to go out alone. Calling a few guards can at least guarantee that you won't be bullied." Bai Yuntian said with concern as she held Chen's hand tightly. Now that things had developed to this point, there was nothing she could do. She could only accept this reality. Chapter 67. Although Changyang Ba strongly objected to Jianshin not having any guards, Jianshin was extremely firm on this matter. In the end, Changyang Ba could only agree to Jianshin's request. Once everything was discussed, Bai Dao spoke once more. "According to the news I've received from the Imperial Palace, the Huayun sect has already received the news and is hurrying over to Lore City. They'll probably arrive by noon at the latest, so you should send Changyang Shoten away as soon as possible. Otherwise, it'll be too late." Everyone in the hall could not help but become stern when they heard that. Chang Bo stood up from his chair and said, "Then let your 4th young master pack up. I'll take him away on a hawk later." Afterward, everyone left the discussion hall. "Xiang'er, let's go. Let's go to Mother's room. Mother has some things to tell you." As soon as they left the discussion hall, Bai Yuntian pulled Jianshin to her room. After entering her room, Bai Yuntian pulled Jianshin to a chair and sat down. Her face was currently covered in tears because she knew extremely well that they would not be able to see each other for a very long time after Jianshin left. At the same time, who knew how many hardships Jianshin would have to endure on the Tianyuan continent, where people were sinister and the situation was complicated. Perhaps the worst-case scenario would be the last time they would see each other. "Xiang'er, You're not young anymore, and you're about to leave soon. There are some things that Mother should tell you. Bai Yuntian's face was covered in crystalline tears as she said, Xiang'er, don't you find it very strange why you don't have a grandfather or a grandmother? Jianchen nodded and said nothing. Bai Yuntian continued, Xiang'er, Mother isn't actually from the kingdom of Jessen. Instead, I'm from the Karl Empire, one of the 3 great empires on the continent. Our Bai family is a great clan that has existed for over 1,000 years in the Karl Empire. Our clan is large, and our influence is far greater than the current Huayan sect. In Hellfire City of the Karl Empire, our Bai family has been the most powerful clan in Hellfire City for several hundred years. This is because your great-grandfather is a saint ruler, and other than him, there are 4 other great-grandfathers who are Heaven Saint Masters. They are all elders of the Bai family. At this point, Bai Yuntian sighed. Unfortunately, good times don't last long. 30 years ago, when I was still young, your great-grandfather went out without any news, and he never came back. No one knew what happened. 20 years after your great-grandfather disappeared, 2 of the 4 elders of our Bai family went out to search for your great-grandfather. However, just 2 days after they left, a shocking piece of news came to our Bai family. The 2 elders who went out to search for your great-grandfather were actually killed in the wilderness. Bai Yuntian's face was filled with sorrow when she said this. This news is like a bolt out of the blue to our Bai family. The 2 elders were both Heaven Saint Masters. Even on the Tianyuan continent, they could be regarded as peak experts, but I never thought that the 2 of them would actually be killed. They did not even have the chance to escape. From this, our Bai family has realized that a powerful enemy has begun to plot against our Bai family. Perhaps your great-grandfather has already met with misfortune. It's a pity that the enemy didn't give us any time to catch our breath. On the night we learned that the 2 elders had been killed, a large group of mysterious people charged into our Bai family and began a massacre. They were extremely powerful, and the 2 remaining elders of the Bai family were unable to suppress them completely. In the end, they were killed by them. Seeing that even the 2 most powerful elders of the Bai family had died, there was no one left in the Bai family who could stop the enemy. At that time, your grandparents and a few loyal guards of the Bai family all died in battle to protect me and a group of people from the Bai family. In the end, only your uncle and I managed to escape. We hid in a small household in Hellfire City, which was how we managed to avoid being captured. Your uncle and I have been hiding for a few days. After everything calmed down, the 2 of us changed our appearances and concealed our identities. We escorted a caravan out of Hellfire City as mercenaries and finally arrived in the kingdom of Jessen. Tears continuously flowed from Bai Yuntian's eyes, and her expression was filled with sorrow and pain. Xiang'er, the Bai family that was once incomparably glorious with thousands of people, is now only the 2 of us and your uncle. You must remember that not only does the blood of Changyang Prefecture flow in your veins, half of it is also the blood of the Bai family. The continuation of our Bai family depends on you, so you must protect yourself well outside, understand? Jianshan nodded silently, but his heart was already in turmoil, unable to calm down for a long time. The impact of his mother's words on Jianshan was just too great. After a while, Jianshan finally calmed down and asked, Mother, don't we know the identity of those mysterious people? Which faction they belong to? Bai Yuntian shook her head. We don't know. Your uncle and I were still young back then, so we didn't know much, so we didn't know who they were at all. The 2 elders of our Bai family probably knew, but they're already dead. As she spoke, Bai Yuntian took out a red brocade pouch from her bosom. She stared at it blankly, as if she was immersed in her memories. She murmured, Xiang', before your grandfather passed away, he gave this brocade pouch to your mother. He said that this is our Bai family's heirloom, passed down from generation to generation. It has been passed down for thousands of years. He told me to take good care of it. Those mysterious people came to destroy our Bai family because of this brocade pouch. Jianshin's gaze fell on the red pouch and asked, "Mother, what's inside?" "There's only a piece of skin the size of a palm inside. As for what it's used for, I don't know." As she spoke, Bai Yuntian stuffed the red pouch into Jianshin's hands and said, "Xiang'er, although this pouch only contains a piece of skin, since it's our family heirloom, it's definitely not that simple. Now that you're the only descendant of our Bai family, I should give this pouch to you. I hope you can take good care of it, but it's best if you don't take it out outside. Although it's very difficult to meet someone who knows what's inside, it's better to be safe than sorry." Jianshin tightly held the red pouch in his hands and silently nodded. Dong dong dong. At this moment, a series of knocks suddenly came from the door. Hearing the knocks, Bai Yuntian wiped the tears from her face and said, "Who is it?" There was no sound from outside. After quite a while, a voice rang out, "Sister, it's me." Jianshin became stunned when he heard the familiar voice, because he just happened to hear this voice before. It belonged to the middle-aged man called Bai Dao who had come from the imperial palace. A complicated expression flashed through Bai Yuntian's face when she heard the voice. She said, "Come in. Come in." The door opened and a middle-aged man in black robes slowly walked in. It was Bai Dao. Bai Yuntian stood up and looked at Bai Dao. She bitterly said, "Brother, it's been 20 years. You've finally come to visit your sister. I thought you'd forgotten about me long ago." Jianshin's eyes narrowed slightly. From how his mother had addressed the middle-aged man, he could tell that he was his uncle. "Sigh." Bai Dao let out a long sigh. "Sister, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I haven't come to see you in the past 20 years. Actually, I haven't forgotten about you. It's just that the burden on my shoulders is just too heavy. I will definitely take revenge for the Bai family. I will only live for revenge in my life." Bai Yuntian sighed before turning to Jianshin. She gently said, "Xiang'er, he's your uncle, Bai Dao." "Uncle?" Jianshin called out. This was the first time he had heard of this uncle of his, and it was also the first time he had seen him. Bai Dao studied Jianshin and could not help but faintly smile. He said, "Xiangtian, I've heard about your achievements in Kargath Academy from the Imperial Palace. Very good. You really are a descendant of our Bai family. I hope you work hard and don't disappoint us all." With that, Bai Dao suddenly became stern. He said to Bai Yuntian, "Sister, I know you don't want Xiangtian to leave, but there's nothing we can do about it. Changyang Prefecture is not the Huaiyan sect's opponent right now. If we leave Xiangtian in Changyang Prefecture, not only will it be difficult to protect him, it won't bring any benefits to Changyang Prefecture either. Perhaps Changyang Prefecture will end up like my Bai family. Let's get Xiangtian to leave as soon as possible. If we're too late, he won't be able to leave even if he wants to." Bai Yuntian gently nodded. She understood that the imperial family was unwilling to stand on their side. Afterward, Bai Yuntian prepared some necessities and some clothes for Jianshin with tears streaming down her face before leaving the room with Jianshin. Jianshin's aunts, Changyang Ba and Chang Bo, were already there when they arrived in the backyard of Changyang Prefecture. The large eagle was sitting there obediently. Changyang, who grabbed Jianshin's arm and solemnly looked at him. He said in concern, "Brother, you have to take care of yourself outside, okay?" Jianshin nodded and smiled. "Don't worry, brother. I'll definitely take care of myself. But don't slack off after I leave. You have to study more battle techniques." Changyang, who firmly nodded and firmly said, "I will. Brother, I've dragged you down this time because of my lack of strength. I'll definitely work hard on cultivation in the future." At this moment, Jianshin's sister, Changyang Mingyue, arrived before Jianshin and passed a pouch to Jianshin. She said, "Brother, this is a protective talisman I've made for you. I hope you'll be safe outside. You have to keep it with you." Changyang Mingyue was now 18 and had become a slender young lady. She was as beautiful as a flower, capable of causing the downfall of nations. Jianshin accepted the protective talisman from Changyang Mingyue. Although he knew that the protective talisman would not bring him any substantial benefits, it was still a token of his sister's goodwill. "Thank you, sister. I'll definitely take good care of this protective talisman." Jianqin smiled. At this moment, Changyangba took out a ring from his bosom and said, "Xiang'er, I've already prepared this space ring for you. I originally planned on giving it to you after you graduated from the academy, but it looks like I don't need to wait that long. I'll give it to you right now. I've already prepared some necessary items for you inside." "Thank you, father." Jianqin silently accepted the space ring with mixed feelings. "Xiang'er, space rings are extremely valuable items on the Tianyuan continent. You can't reveal this space ring before you're strong enough, just in case you attract unnecessary trouble," Changyangba said solemnly. Chapter 68. After bidding farewell to everyone, Jianchen was led by Changbo onto the hawk and flew away from Lore City. Jianchen lowered his head as he sat on the back of the hawk. He stared blankly at the large city several thousand meters below. His emotions were extremely complicated. This was the second time he had left Changyang Prefecture and Lore City in the 15 years since he had arrived in this world. The first time he had left was to study in Kargath Academy, but this time was completely different. Jianchen understood that he would not be able to see his family again for a very long time after he left this time. Moreover, he would have to travel alone on the extremely dangerous Tianyuan continent that was filled with the aura of slaughter. He would have to rely on himself for everything. Jianchen did not even know if he would have the chance to see his family again in the future. After all, he had already understood the situation of the Tianyuan continent from the books. This was a world where the strong were respected. Everything on the Tianyuan continent was based on strength. It was much more dangerous than the Jianghu of his previous life. With his current strength, no one knew what would happen in the future if he were to travel on this extremely dangerous continent. Changbo glanced at Jianchen, who was deep in thought as he sat on the hawk. He said, "Fourth young master, everything will depend on you from now on. You must be careful when you travel alone on the continent." "I know what to do, Changbo," Jianchen replied softly without even turning his head. Changbo stared deeply at Jianchen and sighed inside. He did not say anything else. The hawk flew straight towards the sun that had just appeared at the horizon. The fierce wind whistled in their ears, causing Jianchen and Changbo's hair and clothes to flutter. The flying eagle flew past several cities and villages of various sizes. Just as the sun was about to set, the flying eagle finally flew over a small city. Looking at the small city below, Jianchen suddenly said, "Changbo, send me off here." Changbo lowered his head and looked at the small city below. He nodded, "All right." Afterward, Changbo controlled the hawk to stop 10 kilometers away from the city. Jianchen jumped off the hawk and turned to Changbo, saying, "Changbo, you should hurry back. The Huayan sect has probably already arrived in our Changyang Prefecture." Changbo nodded from the hawk and said, "Fourth young master, take care of yourself." Jianchan waved his hand at Changbo, then walked towards the city 10 kilometers away without looking back. Changbo sat on the hawk, staring at Jianchan's back. Only when Jianchan disappeared from his line of sight did he sigh and mutter to himself, "Fourth young master, I hope that when we meet again, you can give me a pleasant surprise." The eagle's wings flapped violently. With a burst of sand and pebbles, smoke and dust filled the air. It had already brought Uncle Chang up into the sky and returned in the direction they came from. Right now, the sun was about to set and the sky was dusk. When Jianchen arrived at the road leading to the small city, there were still many people walking towards the city. However, they were mostly mercenaries riding various magic beasts and caravans. Jianchen's appearance naturally attracted the attention of some people. Many mercenaries looked at him with vigilance, but when they saw Jianchen's young face and saw his age, the vigilance in their eyes immediately disappeared. Jianchen sized up these mercenaries riding various magic beasts. He saw that these mercenaries looked to be in their 20s to 50s. Some were wearing armor, some are wearing beast skins, and some are wearing clothes. When he got closer, Jianqin could clearly feel that these mercenaries had a bloody aura. With his rich experience, he naturally knew that these mercenaries had been baptized by slaughter. 10 kilometers was not a long distance, so Jianqin arrived very quickly. Jianqin raised his head and looked at the 20-meter high city wall in front of him. The city wall had clearly been there for many years, and it was not maintained for many years. The merciless passage of time had left clear marks on the tall city wall. Above the city gate, 3 words were written in flamboyant calligraphy: White Cloud City. "Hey, stop, what are you doing?" Just as Jianqin passed by the city gate, he was stopped by a guard. Jianqin chuckled. He took out a few gold coins from his spatial belt and stuffed them into the guard's hand. He said, "Brother, I'm a mercenary. I've come to White Cloud City with a mission." The guard glanced at the gold coins in his hand from the corner of his eye. He immediately put on a smile and said, "Oh, since you have a mission, I won't delay your precious matters. Go on in." After entering White Cloud City, Jianqin walked another 2 to 3 kilometers and arrived at a bustling street. Although the sun had already set, the street was still bustling. There was an endless stream of people coming and going on the streets. On both sides of the street, there were shops that sold all kinds of goods. The ground of the street was completely pieced together by large pieces of stone. The surface was very smooth, so the inside was very flat. Even if a vehicle was running on it at a slow speed, it would not feel the slightest bit of bump. Jianqin rubbed his stomach. Then he looked at a restaurant on the street and walked in. He had not eaten for the entire day, so his stomach was hurting from hunger. "Sir, please come in." Jianqin found an empty table and sat down under the warm welcome of a waiter. "Sir, would you like to stay in the restaurant or have a meal?" The waiter was a young man who was about 20 years old. He had a professional smile on his face, which made him look very friendly. Jianqin glanced at the mercenaries who were chatting loudly in the restaurant and said calmly, "I'm going to stay in the restaurant and have a meal. What kind of food do you have here?" Then the waiter immediately introduced Jianqin to all kinds of things in the restaurant. However, the dishes that he introduced were all the most expensive in the restaurant. This was because the waiter could already tell that Jianqin was a rich young master from the luxurious clothes that he was wearing. Jianqin did not care about the price of these dishes and casually ordered a few dishes that he had not tried before. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Jianqin booked a medium-sized room in the restaurant and went straight into the room to rest. This restaurant was obviously not high-end. The furnishings in this medium-sized room were very simple. Compared to Changyang Prefecture, it was simply worlds apart. Other than a wooden bed made of hardwood, there was only a table and a few chairs in the room. Other than that, there was nothing else. Even so, the room was very clean. Jianqin never had the habit of being picky. This kind of room was already quite satisfactory for him. After closing the door, Jianqin walked to the bed and sat down. Then he took out the space ring that his father gave him before he left and opened it to check the items inside. The space ring was indeed a high-grade item. The space inside was much larger than a belt. It was close to 100 square meters. In the center of the space ring, there was a small pile of items. There were not many items. Compared to the space of 100 square meters, this small pile of items could not even fill up a corner. Within the pile of items, there were several thousand purple coins that flickered with a purple light and over 10,000 gold coins that shone with a golden light. Other than these items, there was also a small pile of monster cores. There were only around 40 to 50 of them. Class 2 monster cores were the majority. There were only around 10 Class 3 monster cores and 1 Class 4 monster core. Looking at the items in the space ring, Jianqin felt warmth in his heart for a moment. Although there were not many items, they were all very practical and just happened to be what Jianqin needed. From this, it was enough to see how much Changyangba cared about Jianqin. Jianqin carefully kept the space ring close to his chest. He did not forget what his father had told him before he left. Before he became strong enough, he could not expose the space ring to others. This was because space rings were not as common as space belts. Space rings were very precious in the Tianyuan continent. Although there were many people who possessed space rings, all of them were either powerful or were the descendants of famous families. They had enough strength to protect their belongings. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, Jianqin took out a few monster cores from his space belt and held them in his hand. Then he slowly closed his eyes and entered a state of cultivation. The energy within the monster cores was absorbed by Jianqin at an extremely terrifying speed. At this moment, if someone was present, they would definitely see the monster cores in Jianqin's hand emitting a faint glow. The energy leaking from the monster cores was so dense that it formed a blurry, visible energy ribbon that enveloped Jianqin's body. At the same time, the Class 1 monster cores in Jianqin's hand rapidly shrank in size. Ever since Jianqin broke through to the Saint Realm and 2 specks of light appeared in his dantian, his path of cultivation had become extremely difficult. Although the speed at which he absorbed the energy of the world had increased by more than 10 times, he only absorbed a pitiful 1% of it. Although the speed at which he absorbed the energy of the monster cores was much faster than before, the consumption of the monster cores was so great that it was not something that Jianqin could bear. It only took 2 hours for Jianqin to absorb the Class 1 monster cores in his hand. Then Jianqin continued to take out several Class 1 monster cores from his space belt and continued to cultivate. Fortunately, he still had a few hundred Class 1 and Class 2 monster cores in his space belt. Although it was not much, it could at least sustain his cultivation for a few days. Moreover, there were more than 10 Class 3 monster cores and 2 Class 4 monster cores in the space belt that his father gave him. The next day, when the sun had risen high in the sky, Jianqin woke up from his cultivation state. That night he had used another 40 to 50 monster cores just for cultivation alone. Sigh. Feeling the rapidly decreasing number of monster cores in his space belt, Jianqin let out a long sigh. His face was full of helplessness. The purple and green specks of light in his dantian had really brought him endless distress. After calming down, Jianqin walked out of the room and directly left the restaurant, strolling on the street outside. The morning air was particularly clear, and the fiery red sun in the sky had not yet released its scorching heat. The warm sunlight shining on one's body gave a very comfortable feeling. There were many mercenaries hurrying about on the street, and from time to time there would be pairs of peddlers slowly flowing along the street. Chapter 69. In the Tianyuan continent, no matter which country or city it was, the mercenary union would always be built in the center of the city. Beside the mercenary union, there would always be a bank that was not much smaller than the mercenary union. Although the White Cloud City was only a second-tier city, it still occupied a very large area. Jianqin walked on the streets for an hour before finally arriving at the most bustling street in the center of the city. In front of him, there was a 20-meter-tall building that stood there silently like a giant beast in the deep sea. It was the Mercenary Union. The Mercenary Union was very large, and the shape of the building looked more like a kind of magical beast. At the entrance, there was an endless stream of mercenaries in various outfits. Jianqin directly entered the Mercenary Union. Although this was his first time coming to such a place, he had already read about the procedures to become a mercenary in the Academy's library. There were many people in the Mercenary Union. The mercenaries who needed to go through the procedures were lined up like a long dragon. The dozen or so windows in front of the counter were filled with people. However, they were all here to hand over missions. The innermost window for registering as a mercenary was very cold. Jianqin came to the window for registering as a mercenary and said, "Hello, I would like to register as a mercenary." The person in charge of registering as a mercenary was an old man. He looked to be in his 50s or 60s. Even so, his face was rosy and his old eyes were bright. The old man looked at Jianchen indifferently and said calmly, "To register as a mercenary, you need to have the strength of a saint. Have you reached that level?" "I have already reached that standard," Jianchen said. The old man looked at Jianchen carefully and then took out a piece of paper. At the same time he asked, "What's your name?" "Jianchen." Jianchen, who wanted to conceal his identity, naturally would not use the name Changyang Shoten. So, he directly reported the name he used in his previous life. "How old are you this year?" the old man continued to ask. Hearing that, Jianchen thought for a moment before replying, 20 years old. Jianchen could not reveal his true age because a 15-year-old saint was just too rare on the Tianyuan continent. Once this matter spread, it would probably cause him some unnecessary trouble. In the Kargath Academy, although many people knew that Jianchen was extremely talented, only the principal and vice principal knew his true age. A 20-year-old saint was considered quite common on the Tianyuan continent. Moreover, his body had developed far more than ordinary people since he was young, so no one would suspect him even if he said that he was 20 years old. Right now, he looked no different from a 20-year-old youth. "What level of strength have you reached?" the old man asked as he took notes on the paper. "Junior saint," Jianchen replied. The process of registering as a mercenary was very simple. After paying a silver coin, Jianchen officially became a mercenary and obtained his mercenary badge. However, with his current strength, he could only obtain the lowest mercenary badge. After obtaining the badge, Jianchen did not stay in the mercenary union for long and directly left. After asking around, he came to a store that sold medicine. Although there were Radiant Saint Masters who could heal all kinds of injuries on the Tianyuan continent, there were extremely few of them. As a result, Radiant Saint Masters possessed a lofty status on the Tianyuan continent. Very few mercenaries could afford to hire a Radiant Saint Master. Only large mercenary groups could afford to hire a Radiant Saint Master. It was basically impossible for small mercenary groups and individual mercenaries to obtain information on Radiant Saint Masters without paying an exorbitant price. There were countless mercenaries on the Tianyuan continent, and countless people died or died almost every day. Since Radiant Saint Masters were in short supply, there was naturally a need to use medicine to heal. Although the effects of medicine were worlds apart from the healing of Radiant Saint Masters, it was accepted by most mercenaries. This was because normal medicine was extremely cheap apart from high-quality medicines. Although this pharmacy wasn't small, it was still packed with people. Moreover, this pharmacy wasn't like the mercenary union. The soundproofing facilities in the pharmacy were too good. Under the loud voices of the mercenaries, the entire pharmacy seemed to be very noisy. There were many people buying medicine in the store. There was already a long line of people. Jianchen glanced around and then stood in a line with fewer people. "May I ask what you need?" Very soon, it was Jianchen's turn. The clerk sitting at the counter greeted him warmly. "I need some herbs. Do you sell herbs here?" Jianchen asked. The shop assistant looked at Jianchen strangely. This was the first time he had encountered someone who didn't come here to buy medicine, but herbs. Although he was very curious about Jianchen's request, the shop assistant still replied, "Of course we're selling." "Sir, what kind of herbs do you need? As long as we have them, we can take them out." "I need Qilin grass, mop grass, vanilla grass, skeleton grass, sawtooth grass, antelope flower, root flower, lily, tortoise fungus. Do you have these here?" Jianchen listed more than a dozen herbs in a single breath. The clerk nodded without any hesitation and said, "Yes, these herbs are all very common. They are not very expensive. We have all of them. May I ask how many you need?" Jianchen's face showed a trace of happiness. He directly took out a gold coin and placed it in front of the counter, saying, "Give me some of each." These herbs were all very common species. 1 gold coin was enough to buy a cart full of them. Seeing the gold coin on the table, the clerk's eyes lit up. He immediately said, "Okay, please wait for a moment. I will go get them for you now." After saying that, the clerk directly entered the store. After taking the herbs he needed, Jianchen left the store. Then, without stopping, he walked out of the city. He arrived at a small forest 10 miles away from the city. He dug up some soft mud and collected some leaves. After putting them into his space belt, he returned to White Cloud City. After buying some ordinary clothes in White Cloud City, Jianchen arrived at a secluded alley. He hid in a hidden corner and looked around. After confirming that there was no one around, Jianchen immediately took out a small portion of the herbs he had bought from the store. He first crushed the herbs into powder before mixing them with a small amount of water. After that, he added some soft mud from the deep soil. Finally, he ground a few leaves into powder and squeezed them dry. The pitiful amount of juice dripped out. Once he was done, Jianchen directly grabbed the mixture and carefully smeared it on his face. Very quickly, when Jianchen raised his head again, his appearance had completely changed. At this moment, Jianchen looked like a completely different person. Even if someone familiar with him saw his current appearance, they wouldn't be able to recognize him. This was because Jianchen's appearance now looked like a completely different person. His originally handsome face had become ordinary. Even his eyebrows and eyelashes had been modified by him, making them even shorter than before. The only thing that hadn't changed about him was his pair of magnetic eyes and his skinny figure. Jianchen didn't stop because of this. Immediately after, the silver white light wind sword appeared in his hand. His body suddenly turned around beautifully, causing his long hair to flutter in the wind. At this time a silver light flashed, and the light wind sword passed through Jianchen's head at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Jianchen's long hair that reached his waist was neatly cut off, leaving only the length of his shoulder. After that, Jianchen immediately changed his clothes. He changed out of the expensive silk and satin that he originally wore and put on the rough clothes that he had just bought from the store. After dressing up, Jianchen once again looked like a completely different person. Even if someone familiar with Jianchen saw his current appearance, they wouldn't be able to recognize him. Jianchen once again checked his body to make sure that he didn't miss anything. After making sure that his clothes were flawless, he set fire to his original clothes and walked out of the alley. When he arrived at the Mercenary Union again, Jianchen directly went to the place where missions were accepted. The missions in the Mercenary Union were divided into 5 ranks: S, A, B, C, and D. The highest was S rank and the lowest was D. At the same time, the mercenaries were also divided into 5 ranks. Jianchen was currently only a D rank mercenary, so he could only accept D rank missions. A mercenary's rank was determined by the amount of honor you accumulated from completing missions and your own strength. A D rank mercenary's strength had to be at least at the saint level, while a C rank mercenary's strength had to be at least at the great saint level. Based on this, an S rank mercenary's strength had to be at least at the Earth Saint Master level. Even if one's strength had reached the Earth Saint Master level, without the corresponding honor points, it was impossible to become an S rank mercenary. As a result, there were no shortcuts to becoming a mercenary. There were many D rank missions, and many of them were extremely boring. If it wasn't to help someone find something lost in White Cloud City, it was to help a shop buy something or deliver something. None of these things caught Jianchen's interest. Right now, Jianchen's main goal was to find a mission that would allow him to leave the kingdom of Jessen. He knew that the Huayan sect's influence in the kingdom of Jessen was just too great. Although his disguise was flawless, no one could guarantee that his identity would be exposed and he would be hunted down by the Huayan sect. Right now, the best method was to leave the kingdom of Jessen. No matter how great the Huayan sect's influence was, it was still limited to the kingdom of Jessen. It was a pity that there were very few D-rank missions that required a mercenary to leave the country. This was because the missions that required a mercenary to leave the country were of a higher level. At the very least, they wouldn't be assigned to D-rank missions. As a result, Jianchen couldn't find a single D-rank mission even after looking through all of them. Chapter 70. After leaving the mercenary union, Jianqin directly arrived at a place where the merchants gathered in White Cloud City. The place was extremely spacious, so it was where the merchants stored their goods. At the same time, the place was heavily guarded, so there was no need to worry about being stolen. When Jianqin arrived, there were already many merchants bustling about. Everyone was preparing to leave. At the same time, there were many mercenaries riding various magical beasts. Of course, there were also some mercenaries riding horses. Horses were the most common and cheapest form of transportation on the Tianyuan continent. At the same time, they were also the lowest form of transportation. At this moment, a young man who was busy moving goods passed by Jianqin. Jianqin immediately extended his hand to stop him and asked, "Brother, may I ask which of these merchants are leaving the kingdom of Jessin?" The young man glanced at Jianqin in some doubt before pointing at a larger group of merchants in the distance. "That group is leaving the kingdom of Jessin." Jianqin glanced in the direction the young man was pointing at. He saw several dozen carriages filled with goods parked there. There was a large group of mercenaries guarding the goods in the surroundings. A middle-aged man in luxurious robes was directing the workers. Jianqin could tell with a single glance that the middle-aged man was the person in charge of the merchant group. He immediately walked over and arrived before the middle-aged man. He asked, "Uncle, may I ask if your merchant group is leaving the kingdom of Jessin?" The middle-aged man studied Jianqin cautiously when he heard that. He asked, "Why are you asking this?" Jianqin chuckled. "Uncle, if your merchant group is leaving the kingdom of Jessin, can I join you? I'm not very powerful, but I'm still a first-class mercenary. I don't want any payment from you either. So is that all right?" The middle-aged man looked relieved and said indifferently, "Sure, but you have to follow us closely on the road. Also, you have to pay for the expenses along the way. We won't reimburse you for any expenses. If there are bandits blocking the way, you have to contribute and fight with us." On the Tianyuan continent, some of the weaker mercenaries would usually form groups or join large merchant groups if they wanted to travel between kingdoms. Not only was the journey between kingdoms extremely long, but it was also extremely dangerous. Not only would there be bandits on the continent at any time, but there would also be magical beasts. In certain special environments, it would even be very common to be attacked by magical beasts. As a result, almost every merchant group or mercenary group would welcome anyone who wanted to join them. Normally, they would not turn anyone away. After all, an extra person was an extra source of strength. Just a little bit of strength might be enough to save their lives. Jianqin agreed to the middle-aged man's request without any hesitation. "Our merchant group will set off in an hour. Go prepare yourself." With that, the middle-aged man no longer paid any attention to Jianqin. He continued to instruct the young men to move the goods. With that, Jianqin immediately hurried to a place in White Cloud City that specialized in selling mounts. After spending 50 gold coins on a good horse, he returned to where the merchant group had gathered and quietly waited for the merchant group to set off. An hour passed very quickly. Jianqin rode his mount and followed behind the merchant group, slowly making his way to the city gates. Although many of the mercenaries in charge of escorting the merchant group cast curious gazes at Jianqin, no one asked him about his origins. This was because this large caravan was made up of 3 medium-sized caravans. Due to the long journey and unknown dangers, the 3 caravans had hired 3 mercenary groups, and many of them were individual mercenaries. The total number of mercenaries and coachmen was no less than 500. It was normal for them to encounter unfamiliar faces. Very soon, Jianqin followed the merchant group to the gates of White Cloud City. Naturally, the person in charge of the merchant group would negotiate with the guards there. The merchant group did not stay there for long. Once they were done, the merchant group slowly set off from the city. "Wait a moment." At this moment, a middle-aged man in armor quickly walked down from the tower. He held a scroll of paper in his hand. The middle-aged man directly arrived before the city gates, and then he passed the scroll in his hand to a guard and said, "Paste this portrait on the city gates. At the same time, get the best artist in White Cloud City to draw the person in the portrait and paste it on the streets and alleys of the city. Capture anyone who looks like the person in the portrait immediately. Kill them without mercy if they resist." "Yes, Commander." "Commander." A guard immediately took the scroll of paper from the middle-aged man and opened it before pasting it on the city walls. "The person in the portrait is a fugitive of the Jessin kingdom. All of you, keep a close eye on the people in the portrait. Compare them to the person in the portrait. Don't ever let the fugitive escape. Do you understand?" The middle-aged man ordered loudly again. His voice was so loud that even some people who were far away could hear him clearly. When the guard pasted the portrait on the city walls, the person in the portrait appeared before everyone's eyes. It was a young man who seemed to be in his teens, at most in his 20s. The young man had a dignified appearance and was extremely handsome. Although it was only a portrait, the person in the portrait was extremely lifelike, just like a real person. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that the person who drew the portrait was extremely skilled. Only after the portrait was pasted on the city walls did the commander wave his hand. He said to the waiting merchant group, "All right, you can all go." The caravan blocking the city gate continued to move out of the city. But at this time, the number of guards guarding the city gate had increased by several times. The original dozen guards had increased to over 100. Every person entering or leaving the city gate would be stopped by the guards and then compared with the portraits pasted on the city wall. When Jianchen passed by the city gates and saw the portrait on the city walls, his gaze suddenly froze. That was because the person in the portrait was actually his original appearance. Seeing this, Jianchen couldn't help being shocked by the Huayan sect's strength. This place was over 10,000 kilometers away from Lore City. He had only left Lore City yesterday morning and arrived at White Cloud City in the evening. During this time, not only did the Huayan sect perfectly draw his appearance, they even sent it to White Cloud City in such a short time. Just this kind of efficiency was enough to cause one to tremble. Furthermore, Jianchen didn't believe that the Huayan sect only wanted him in White Cloud City. Right now, all the cities in the kingdom of Jessin had already received his wanted list. Thinking of this, Jianchen couldn't help but inwardly rejoice that he had already changed his appearance. Otherwise, if he was recognized with his current strength, it would be very difficult for him to leave White Cloud City. Jianchen rode on his horse and followed the merchant group out of the city. Just as he passed by the city gates, the guards on both sides of the gates cast sharp gazes on his face. However, Jianchen's appearance had already undergone a complete transformation. Even if someone familiar with Jianchen walked in front of him, they wouldn't be able to recognize him, let alone these guards who had never seen him before. Without any obstructions, Jianchen blended into the merchant group as a mercenary and smoothly left White Cloud City. Then, the merchant group continued to move forward along the trade route like a long dragon. This large merchant group was made up of 3 medium-sized merchant groups. Their destination was the Blue Wind Empire, which was the closest to the kingdom of Jessin. As the merchant group was carrying large carts of goods, their speed wasn't very fast. Even though White Cloud City was very close to the border fortress of the kingdom of Jessin, it would take at least 2 to 3 days to reach the border fortress. As for the journey to the Blue Wind Empire, it would take at least half a month. Jianchen's gaze landed on a luxurious carriage in the distance. Not only was this carriage larger, but it was also pulled by 4 Tier 1 demonic beasts that were good at running. Around the carriage were several powerful mercenaries riding on demonic beasts. Moreover, the middle-aged man who agreed to let Jianchen join the merchant group was also around. It seemed like they were all guarding the luxurious carriage. Jianchen could vaguely guess that the person sitting in the carriage was either the boss of the merchant group or someone important. This was because there were only 2 such luxurious carriages in the entire merchant group. After traveling on the official road for 4 days, the merchant group finally arrived at the border fortress of the Kingdom of Jesson. The border fortress of the Kingdom of Jesson was a huge wall that stretched for several miles. It was more than 50 meters tall and 20 meters thick. From afar, it looked like a giant dragon that was entrenched on the ground. It was an awe-inspiring sight. When Jianchen arrived in front of the wall, a huge shadow instantly enveloped him. The 50-meter-tall wall completely blocked the setting sun, causing the light in front of the wall to dim. The majestic aura was enough to shock anyone who saw this wall for the first time. It was as if the thing in front of them was a terrifying monster in the deep sea. Jianchen raised his head to look at the wall that served as the first line of defense for the Kingdom of Jesson. He was extremely shocked. He had seen many walls in his past life, but none of them could compare to the one before him. Even the largest wall he had seen in the past was only 20 meters tall. Compared to the 50-meter wall before him, Wu Ning was like an adult compared to a child. What a huge wall! Who knows how long it took to build such a huge wall? Jianchen sighed as he looked at the wall before him. A mounted mercenary next to Jianchen curled his lips in disdain. He glanced at Jianchen and smiled. The scale of this wall can only be considered average in the Tianyuan continent. Almost every kingdom has one. With that, the mercenary looked at Jianchen from head to toe and continued, "You probably haven't been to the 3 great empires yet. Let me tell you, the border fortresses of the 3 empires have walls that are 100 meters tall and 50 meters thick. They are much more majestic than this. This wall can't compare to them at all." Jianchen turned his head to look at the mercenary who had just spoken. He was in his 20s and had a common face. His skin was rather dark and he wore coarse clothes. He seemed very ordinary. "If there's a chance in the future, you must visit the 3 great empires." Jianchen chuckled.